Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging. Apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now,
Nick Pitts.
And welcome to Point of View on this Wednesday, July 25th, 2018 day. I am your host, Nick Pitts, and so excited you decided to join us this morning. I am joined at the Millennial Roundtable today with Ben Fuqua of Christ Chapel. Ben, how are you this morning?
I'm doing well. I love being here. Thanks for letting me.
So great to have Ben here with us today, and also the legend, the myth, the man, Kerby Anderson.
And always good to be with you as well. Glad you're sitting in that chair today. And it's going to be great to be talking with Ben this hour. And, of course, we have all sorts of other things happen in the next couple of hours. So you stay tuned, because we've got a lot to cover today.
We've got quite a bit to cover. So Ben's going to be helping us better understand the millennial perspective relative to kind of church ministry. So if you're an individual that's in church leadership, or just someone that's very interested in millennials, that's trying to figure out better the mind of the millennial, you're going to want to stick around and listen to Ben for a little bit. We'll be talking with him, as well as a couple of other things as well. We'll be talking about, there's these tariffs that have been going on, this trade war that's happened. And so President Trump the Trump administration kind of gave away some aid to the tune of around $12 billion he's going to free up in order to help farmers. What's a Christian perspective on that? We'll be talking a little bit more about that, as well as, surprisingly, there was just some tragic news. Demi Lovato, who's a pop singer, has been in the news as of late, drug overdose, but then she survived, but now she's at home. But really, that's a pop cultural person, but how it ripples out into each and every one of our lives. Because according to research, about 44% of us know someone that has overdosed before, and 20% of us know someone who's died from that as well, Kerby.
Next issue of Outlook, which is just about ready to land in everybody's box, is on the opioid crisis. So there we go.
You know, it's just fascinating. There's studies, and I know we'll talk about this later on in the show. There's studies that indicate that there was more people that died of an opioid overdose in 2016 than the entire Vietnam War.
That's right.
It's just staggering what's happening right now. And there's so many accentuating factors that's causing this. And so we'll be talking a little bit more about that, as well as opening up the phone lines as well to talk with you about that. But Ben, let's talk with you a little bit.
Yeah.
Let's do the seamless transition from overdose to millennials. You can't make this up.
That was amazing.
Okay, so Ben, tell us a little bit about yourself, man. Where are you from? What do you do now?
Yeah, grew up in the Dallas area.
Okay.
Garland. Went to Criswell Bible College.
Okay, Criswell, shout out.
That is an amazing school right there. Shout out to all the professors that somehow passed me. I still owe them some money, I think, but it really is a great school, big part of shaping who I am. And then got married in 2007 and got really called into ministry and hired at a church in Fort Worth.
Okay.
My wife and I, and we have two boys now. We live in Fort Worth, and I'm on staff at a church called Christ Chapel Bible Church.
That's phenomenal.
It's an awesome church.
I know Christ Chapel very well. Went to Southwestern Seminary from 07 to 09 and just had a really great experience there, and was doing internships most of the time. But during a couple of times when I had Sundays off, I would go visit Christ Chapel, and it was just so amazing what's going on over there.
It really is. God has been doing stuff. I've been there since 2008.
Okay.
And so the last decade, I've just seen God move in some incredible ways there, and the leadership there and the leaders above me and the men who have poured into me are just doing it right, I would say.
That's phenomenal. Well, Ben, tell our audience a little bit about your role there at Christ Chapel.
So my role's evolved over the last decade. I started as like a youth pastor and working with junior high kids, and then they transitioned me pretty quickly as the college pastor.
Okay.
And so we didn't have a college ministry at the time. Believe it or not, our building wasn't big enough. You've seen Christ Chapel.
Oh, wow.
At the time, we didn't have room for it, and it was just busting at the seams. And so I got the privilege of getting to start our college ministry at a bar across the street from TCU.
Wow.
So if you're familiar with Fort Worth, you might know the Aardvark.
Yeah.
Which is a bar, music venue.
Uh-huh.
And wasn't, it's not being used on Sunday morning.
Yeah.
And so I went and met the owner. His name's Danny Weaver. And I just knocked on his door one day and I said, hey, you guys aren't open Sunday morning doing business. Can we meet here and can we have church here at your bar? And he said, sure. And so he let us meet there for free for, that was 2011 when that started. And so we would open up the bar. He'd open up his doors and I'd get up there and preach and we'd have worship and about 250 college students showing up, walking across the street, right there next to TCU. So they're waking up, rolling out of bed, walking across the street into a bar to hear the gospel, to hear biblical preaching, to get connected to community. And so that was awesome.
That's so shocking. I'm trying to think right now, like, was there just already a demand for church leadership, for a church there, a Christian presence at TC? Was there individuals that were already feeling called out of Christ Chapel that were wanting to do that? Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, it's a good question. You mean just the transition to the bar?
Yeah.
Well, I think part of it was we didn't, we had a college ministry that was led by my predecessor and doing a really good job, and we lost the land that we were meeting in.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So we had a spot, and so we had an existing college ministry, but we met across the street from the church. We had to give that land back, kind of one of those deals. We were just kind of, squatting on somebody else's property, and they eventually called us on it. And so there was there was already some momentum there. And so at the beginning of the school year, we just said, hey, we're not meeting across the street. Now we're meeting here. But our demographic really changed slowly. And one of the things that really I loved about it was, and continue to love, we're reaching millennials who I think wouldn't normally walk into a church.
Okay.
Right. We're reaching millennials who, the stigma of the church, especially with this generation, there's a lot of baggage there with a lot of young adults. And so something about being at a bar, it just tears down walls. And so they'll walk into the Aardvark and they'll hear the same gospel, the same word of God. And our goal is to get them plugged into the bigger church. Yeah. Our ecclesiology is we don't want to be a church. We want to be a college ministry. We want to be an outreach. And we want to hear, and we want to get them to fall in love with Jesus. And then we do want to get them into the mature process of getting them plugged into the bigger picture. But that's a process. And so we're reaching guys and girls that wouldn't, I believe, wouldn't normally go to one of the other great churches around town.
So if I'm listening to you correctly, I'm probably, if I'm a listener right now, I'm thinking to myself, 250 people already to start out with, that's not even counting the growth I'm sure that happened while you were there, is already a sizable contingent of college students that are coming. And then knowing that you're growing with that. So tell, what's the secret sauce, right? Like, what are those components that are bringing college students to be able to give up the sleep that they would get on a Sunday morning, or give up some of those things to be able to follow after Jesus?
So it's a good question. So part of it is geography, right? So I'm going to be real honest. Some of it was the geographical advantage and really the sovereignty of God to allow us to be able to have that location and for Danny, the owner, to be able to open up his doors to us. That was a big part of it. We learned a ton, though, in doing that.
Okay.
And so my role has actually changed. So I started as a college pastor, got to build that thing. Now my role is over young adult ministry in general.
Okay.
And so then we said, hey, let's engage and reach millennials on a wider scale, not just the TCU bubble, which we feel like we're doing at capacity. Like we don't have any more room for them. So we're kind of at capacity there. How do we reach the other 70, 80,000 young adults that are in Fort Worth? And so then we started a Wednesday night gathering, and that was at the church.
Okay.
So now all of a sudden we've lost this geographical advantage. Now we're no longer meeting in this cool hipster bar. Yeah. Now we're meeting at a big churchy church.
Yeah.
And millennials aren't necessarily attracted to a big churchy church like Christ Chapel. And so that's when we really had to figure out, okay, what is our secret sauce?
Yeah, that's phenomenal.
And that's been a challenge, but we've learned a ton in that process.
Okay, so we're gonna have to take a break, but when we come back, we're gonna continue talking more about the secret sauce. We'll say about millennial, drawing millennials in. What are some of those components that you're not sacrificing the gospel for, not sacrificing the biblical message for, but really are contextualizing in such a way that you might be alluring to this millennial demographic that largely seems to be leaving the church. But we've got to take a break. So we would love to hear from you, though. We're going to open up the phone lines, 800-351-1212. Again, that number is 800-351-1212. You call in, and you can we'll give you the chance to be able to ask some of your questions or point some comments as well. Or you can go on Facebook, facebook.com/pointofviewradio, facebook.com/pointofviewradio. You leave your question online, and we'll share it over the air. But we'll be back right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
You know, we seem to be witnessing the decline of governmentally sanctioned compelled speech. 3 Supreme Court decisions and the prospect of a new justice on the High Court are the reasons. As we discuss so often on the Point of View radio talk show, compelled speech is perhaps the worst form of anti-free speech. It is bad enough to censor an American citizen from being able to express his or her opinion, but it's even worse to force an American citizen to voice, create, or fund contrary ideas or activities. The Supreme Court ruled against the state of Colorado for punishing Christian baker Jack Phillips. He was fined for refusing to use his artistic talents for a homosexual ceremony, and Justice Kennedy was appalled that the Colorado bureaucrats described the baker's faith as the most despicable pieces of rhetoric that people can use. The court also ruled against the state of California for mandating that a pro-life pregnancy center must advertise for free abortions. In addition to the majority opinion written by Justice Thomas, was a concurring opinion by Justice Kennedy that encouraged the legislators to go back and read the Bill of Rights. In a third case, the justices ruled against an Illinois law that forced state employees to subsidize public employee unions that take political and labor positions contrary to the views of the employees. Justice Alito twice quoted the famous phrase from Thomas Jefferson that to compel a man to furnish contributions of money for the propagation of opinions which he disbelieves and abhors is sinful and tyrannical. The new justice on the court is likely to uphold each one of these precedents and will continue to rule against other examples of compelled speech. That is why it is reasonable to expect to see a decline in these attempts to force people to voice, create, or fund ideas contrary to their deeply held beliefs. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Take Kerby and the Point of View team with you on the go with the Point of View app. Search for Point of View Radio at the Apple or Google Play stores.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
And welcome back to Point of View on this Wednesday, July 25th, 2018. I am joined at the Millennial Roundtable by Kerby Anderson as well as Ben Fuqua of Christ Chapel. And we have been talking about millennials specifically. And Ben was sharing with us over at Christ Chapel in Fort Worth how they started a college church right across the street from TCU at the Aardvark. And then they were just attracting so many people that they eventually grew out of space in that. And there was that new season that they entered into where they went back to their building as well. And so what they lost in geography being right across the street, now they had the secret sauce had to be accentuated. We keep on saying the secret sauce like we're McDonald's with the Big Mac. But nevertheless, Ben was sharing with us, or he was about to share with us before we went to the break, what were some of those characteristics and distinguishing marks for your college ministry that really saw so many individuals be able to start to taste and see and know that the Lord is good. So share with us a little bit about that.
Yeah, absolutely. And just to clarify too, we're still meeting at the bar.
Oh, that's phenomenal.
We're still meeting at the bar.
I didn't realize that.
Yeah, I've hired another guy super gifted, and he's kind of running that thing.
Okay.
And my role has shifted to where on Sunday morning we still got a bunch of college students showing up to that, but we also have a Wednesday night thing.
That's phenomenal.
And our Wednesday night thing really is our larger gathering for young adults. It's college students through 35-year-olds.
Okay.
Really, anybody who kind of considers themselves a young adult. And so our secret sauce, kind of one of the many things we've learned about young adults, and this is a buzzword that I feel like listeners might have heard 100 times, and it's easy when I talk about this to roll your eyes about this concept, but it's that young adults, specifically when it comes to ministry, church-related world, and I would say across the board, I would say even advertising and those kind of things, they're looking for something authentic, right? And we know that's a buzzword that we hear a lot about millennials, but we see that over and over again as something that really is true, that this generation has grown up, especially connected to the Bible Belt and churches. they've seen a lot of very programmatic things. And so how we do announcements, right? How we preaching style on Wednesday nights or on Sunday morning at the Aardvark, they all really have to be driven by, is this really my voice? Is this Ben being authentic and who I am as a communicator, how God has wired me, or is this Ben trying to be Matt Chandler, or is this Ben trying to be John Piper, or is it, and I think that's been really key for us, is a level of vulnerability and authenticity in everything we do, in how we market and how we advertise. Does it feel gimmicky? Is a question we ask. And so then we just have a lot of young adults who are on our team and our staff who speak into that, and they'll let their radars kind of go up and say, hey, this just feels gimmicky, programmatic, too packaged, too polished, all those things, which really deter. I mean, they'll show up once, but if it feels like some canned thing, or if they feel like these people are fake, then they'll run.
Yeah, which brings up a really good thing. I did a couple of years of college ministry at First Baptist Arlington, so right over down the street from you all. And I think one of the distinguishing factors, and tell me if you're seeing this, relative to authenticity to previous generations, is there was a previous generation that said familiarity bred contempt. And so you don't let the right hand know what the left hand is doing. And so how that worked its way out in communication was, I wasn't giving, when I was giving illustrations or giving anecdotes, I wasn't sharing something about some book that I read. I wasn't sharing something about some illustration from the 1800s or 1700s, or maybe just some anecdotal little quip about a little boy that went to his dad. It was more of, this is how I'm dealing with it right now. And so that was the authenticity part.
Absolutely.
I'm not saying that I neglect those books or those quips, but I just, whenever there was a point for me to insert my personality into it and for me to share just a little mini testimony, I found that gained great currency with college. Is that something
absolutely
similar?
I mean, think about this generation. They are drowning in shallow fake relationships.
Yeah.
I mean, there's shallow fake relationships through social media, through the way this culture is designed because of technology, and there's some really good things to that, the connectability that happens, but they are hungry and starving for something real and authentic. And I think it's really easy for church leaders to hear a young adult or a young adult pastor say, oh, we got to be authentic. And those older leaders are being authentic.
Yeah.
They're being authentic, or they're trying to be. And so it's easy to roll your eyes at that. But I think, like you said, real practically using personal examples. If I'm talking about lust, I'm going to bring up, hey, here are areas of my life where I've struggled. Here's areas where I've seen victory. Here's how I incorporate my wife in, here's things like that. If I'm talking about greed, if I'm talking about my own disciplines, spiritual disciplines that we are bringing in, they want to know that we're real. Because they're surrounded by so much phoniness.
Yeah, it's so fascinating just because Kerby and I have talked about this before. I don't know if this is something that you can share and sentiment. I mean, you scroll through Facebook, you scroll through Twitter, you scroll through Instagram, and it seems like nothing but perfection.
Yeah.
And then when you kind of equate that for someone that doesn't grow up in the church, all they think about is the kind of Ned Flanders from the Sanders, or Simpsons rather.
Yeah.
Just perfection, like these people don't do anything imperfect. But the reality is, perfection is the goal, but perfection is not reality for us right now. And sometimes it requires us to step outside the frames that we see in Instagram in order to be able to say, imitate me, even though I've fallen short, as I try to imitate Christ Jesus.
100%. Yeah, you nailed it. Yeah, I think being able to see kind of behind the curtain is big for this generation for sure.
What do you think has bred that skepticism, that desire for authenticity in millennials?
So these are all real generalizations, and I think this is a dangerous one. But I think I think this generation has watched the generation before them.
Yeah,
right. We've watched our parents, and by the grace of God, I have a couple of amazing parents, and so I'm not necessarily speaking from a personal standpoint here. But I think a lot of people in this generation have seen their parents, and they've seen what their parents projected, right? And they've seen the American dream that their parents tried to pursue, and they've seen a lack of happiness and a lack of joy and a lack of contentment in that. Yeah. And they've identified, okay, I don't want that.
Yeah.
And they haven't quite exactly figured out how to get what they do want, but I think there's a level of they've seen, well, I kind of know where that goes.
Yeah.
To some degree. So I think that's a part of it. Go ahead.
Yeah, I would say the exact same thing. I mean, there is a sense that in this world today, I mean, this millennial generation grew up, Kerby's heard me say this before, we grew up seeing Enron fail. We grew up seeing the Catholic Church fail. We grew up seeing government corruption. not at a level that's been any different than previous generations. Right. It's just social media, and the media has put it up a microphone before it and a camera before it. Absolutely. To where it just has bred this skepticism within us that's brought us to this point. That's caused us to be so distrustful, one, hashtag fake news, whatever you want to think about that, but then also just this isolation perspective of I really can't do anything in it. Yeah. And so are you seeing something
I do see that. I think connected to this idea of authenticity and what they're looking for, we use this rhetoric a lot when we're talking about engaging millennials, and it's the idea of this is a show me generation, not a tell me generation. Yeah. People have talked about that, and I think that's so true. This generation really is a show me, not a tell me. And if you think about the generation before us with Billy Graham crusades, I mean, Billy Graham, by the grace of God and the power of God, would get up there and just tell people the gospel in a way that only he could. Amazingly gifted guy, and people would come forward. Crusades, the Holy Spirit can use whatever it wants to use.
Can use a donkey if it wants.
Right, absolutely. But we don't see door-to-door evangelism and the crusade model work quite as well to this generation because they say, show me. Don't just tell me the gospel,
That's
show
what I got
me
Google
the gospel.
for, right?
Yeah,
That's what I got YouTube for. How to. Like you look at the top Google searches from 2017 last year, 4 out of the 10 were how-tos. Like we have Google that tells us how to do these things.
Absolutely.
We need a living model before us to be able to demonstrate how to do those things, right?
And so if we're going to reach millennials, we've got to figure out how to build a ministry around the idea of how do we show them, not just tell them. Mm-hmm. How do we build a ministry that isn't just a concert, isn't just a speaking platform, that it's not just all built around the 35-minute sermon I'm going to give. And we do that, Christ Chapel, a number of ways. We, like, for example, we do meals, as many meals as possible. We do a big tailgate before our Wednesday night thing.
I love it.
And we have a bunch of people that just come, we grill out, and we intentionally create lots of roles so that we also have lots of volunteer opportunities because they want ownership.
Yeah.
And so all of a sudden now we've got millennials who have ownership in the event, and they're cooking, and they're cleaning, and they're flipping burgers. And then we've got just community that we build around it so that people are known and have access to us too.
I think one of the fascinating, and I love that idea of having grills, and I love that idea of like the hospitality component, just because I think that's so lacking. But then I love the brilliance of it, of being able to give individuals ownership in it, of saying, you want to have this meal? That's great, but I need somebody to help me flip burgers. I need somebody to help set the table. Because I'm just struck by this statistic, Kerby, that 54% of Americans will eat alone once a week, or rather will have the majority of their meals alone. And just this idea, like, we're just looking for somebody to eat a meal with.
Absolutely.
And there's just something beautiful about Jesus. We continue to see littered all throughout the scriptures of sharing meals with people, of breaking bread with people, of even right now, there is a great party that's going on that is a meal that's happening up in heaven. But we've got to take a break. And so when we come back from the break, we're going to continue to talk to Ben more about millennials and what some of the secret sauce is in their meals that they're bringing that's causing millennials to flock over to Christ Chapel. And so you can find out more information about Ben at the website, pointofview.net. You can click on his picture, and then it will direct you to kind of biographical information as well as some website stuff to Christ Chapel. But then when we come back, we'll continue talking to millennials, talking more about millennials. And you can call in at 800-351-1212. Again, that number is 800-351-1212. Or you can head on over to Facebook, facebook.com/pointofviewradio. And then in that live video box, you'll see a comment section underneath that. You leave your comment online, and we'll share it over air as well. And so we're going to take a break, but when we come back, more about millennials right after this.
We live in a digital generation. Point of View is reaching this often overly plugged-in generation with truth. You can keep up with us 24 hours a day using your phone, your tablet, your laptop, or your desktop. Search for the Point of View Radio Talk Show on Facebook, where you can keep up with today's issues, learn about current and upcoming guests by liking us on Facebook. Also, follow us on Twitter. Our handle is @PointOfViewRTS. That stands for Point of View Radio Talk Show. Learn, interact, make a difference with Point of View using new media. And here's one way you can make a big difference. Help us increase our reach by spreading the word among your friends. Share a Facebook post. Tag us in a tweet. With enough joining us to plant seeds, we'll see a tremendous harvest. Come on, it only takes a minute. Search for Point of View Radio Talk Show on Facebook, @PointOfViewRTS on Twitter, and subscribe to the Point of View Radio Talk Show channel on YouTube. Learn, interact, share. The Point of View Radio Talk Show. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is
Nick Pitts.
And welcome back to Point of View. I'm your host today, Nick Pitts. I'm joined at the Millennial Roundtable by Ben Fuqua, as well as Kerby Anderson. And Kerby, you were chomping at the bit with the question, and so we'll let you have a question in on this Millennial Roundtable.
Well, this is my one question, because the two of you are doing so well. I'm just watching. This is great conversation. But, Ben, let's talk about that. Just a minute ago, we were talking about the fact that this is a generation that's seen a high divorce rate, and there is maybe an emphasis sometimes in our society for
or low commitment, almost a commitment phobia. So how do you address this issue in a culture where individuals aren't brand loyal, they aren't committed? What do you do in terms of raising and talking about the cost of discipleship?
That's good. Great question. So here's how I would take a stab at that question from my vantage point, and I feel like kind of some of the things I'm seeing. It is a generation that is very willing to lay down their life for something they believe in.
Yes.
And we've seen that. I think it is an amazing generation. I get excited about what this generation is going to do with the gospel of Jesus Christ and the future of the church in a lot of really great ways. I think the fear of commitment comes from that. I would also categorize this as an options culture. Unlike any other, and you touched on this a little bit ago, Nick, they are just surrounded by options. And so, for example, even in the dating world, right? I've spent a lot of time with singles, and we all see statistically the age of marriage is being pushed further and further back in some unique ways that have never happened in our culture. And so much of that, I think, goes to the idea that there's so many options. It's paralyzing. And so even in the dating world, I'm walking with guys and they're thinking, well, this girl's great, but I'm also comparing her to hundreds of other girls I don't really have a relationship with, but I see them on my social, they're friends of mine on Facebook or whatever, or the, just all the ways that we have access now to the opposite sex that is dangerous in some ways. And all the ways that we are just inundated by other options. It gets paralyzing because I don't want to pick the wrong option. And what if Prince Charming, or what if this girl shows up in my life? And I think it dwarfs our ability. When I was dating my wife, I married a woman who's actually in our community. I feel like most every generation, it's, well, yeah, these are the people. I'm going to marry somebody from this community, people that I'm carpooling with and doing life with. And now our communities have seemingly become infinitely larger.
Yes.
And it paralyzes.
And moves in Kerby's notes, I've talked about this before. I'm going to try to bring together David Brooks and Aziz Ansari here a little bit. And so Aziz Ansari wrote the book Modern Romance. David Brooks has got a book, is about to write a book right now on commitment. And so there's four commitments that he says that we make in our life. He says that we make a commitment to a vocation, we make a commitment to a community, make a commitment to a family, and we make a commitment to a religion or a philosophy. And so I think that family component, though, is just very interesting, especially when you think about millennials right now, because the numbers are very clear that even 20 years ago, that the younger demographic, those in their 20s, were getting married around 22, 23, and that's jumped up now to 29 and 30 years old. It seems to only going to be getting higher as we continue to let those numbers just extrapolate out. But what's fascinating is there was a switch relative to the philosophical mindset of what marriage was, of what marriage is to what it was. So in a previous generation, marriage was seen as a need, right? The man had certain needs, the woman had certain needs that weren't being provided for, and therefore they leaned on one another to make those commitments. And so it only made sense, outside of even technology then, for individuals just to say, yes, I need this, and I'm just going to find it in the communities that I'm around. May it be my apartment building, may it be the house or the community that I go to, the civic organizations, et cetera, et cetera. But now you've got a millennial generation that, one, those needs aren't being met. It's marriage isn't a need anymore, and this is where Aziz Ansari moves into it. Marriage is seen as a desire. It's a luxury that we have, and so we want to get the most out of this luxury, just like all of us want to get the biggest bang for our buck. We want to get the most out of the luxury, one. And then two, there's just a sense that my needs are already being provided for now. So that's why helicopter parenting, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
That mom's doing the laundry, or mom's doing this or that, or dad's providing this or that. And so then I don't necessarily need those needs fulfilled, or those are already being fulfilled right now. So it gives me the luxury to be able to pursue after the passion.
That's really well said. Yeah, I mean, I'm right on with that. I think that's really well said. It's a luxury. And so why, and I think it shows that there is a level of commitment, because they know, man, I want to get married. I want to stay married. I don't want to get divorced like my parents or like my next door neighbors or like my friends' parents. But they don't want to pull the trigger for exactly that reason. It is kind of a luxury. And I don't want to pull the trigger on the wrong thing. It's kind of FOMO idea, this fear of missing out idea.
It was so fascinating. So you bring up FOMO. So for some of our listeners, I think it's a really neat concept. It's the fear of missing out. And so there's just millennials. It's very much characteristic. It's synonymous with the millennial experience right now of wanting to not miss out on anything. But in essence, missing out on everything because they're so consumed with what other people are doing.
Yeah.
But it's even translated over. I saw an article yesterday about Venmo. And so Venmo is this cash exchange app that individuals use. So instead of giving somebody money, like physical cash or a check, Venmo just allows it to be transferred electronically for our listeners. And now individuals now are looking through Venmo to be able to see what their friends are paying for and what they're doing because there's so much of a desire on not missing out on the experience. And so they're even looking at their financial transactions. All of that to say, if you're suffering from Venmo FOMO, you can go to pointofview.net. We'll help you. No, I'm just kidding. We have no help. We can just eliminate the problem that you have.
But you can Venmo me if you want.
Yeah. You're more than welcome to do that. But it does point back to that desire of potentially the reason why individuals can't make commitment is because they're so consumed on missing out and so holding out.
Yeah.
So how are you all addressing that kind of commitment phobia that individuals are having?
It's a great question. I think so much of what the church should be doing is just being the better, right? Jesus was better, right? Yeah. And so I think being the better community, being being what we're called to be as a community, being so this buzzword of authentics, and I get it if you're rolling your eyes. I really think leaning into that and saying, what does that really look like to have an authentic community, to be known, to meet some of those relational needs in a gospel-centered community? We should throw Christians and churches, we should throw the best parties.
Yeah.
We should have the best community. We should have, Christ came to give us life and life to the fullest. Mm-hmm. And so I think so much of it is just getting young adults to experience what that looks like, to say, man, there is life here, and I don't have to look to the world, to those things, and getting to know other relationships, other guys and girls in that kind of a community of gospel-centered grace and truth, this beautiful balance that we're called to in the Christian life. So I think that's a lot of it. And then I think for us, it's just taking guys around the shoulder and walking with them and encouraging them and pointing out some of those blind spots.
Yeah, that's great.
One of the things that just sort of surfaced when you were talking about all the choices is we are dealing with overchoice. And it seems to me that another need right now for every generation, but especially the millennial generation, is how to make wise choices. Because if there's one thing we've learned from sociology, as choice increases, commitment decreases. The more choices I have, the less committed I am to any of those choices.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I think that's we see that throughout. We see that throughout. We've just got so many different choices. Something else interesting, kind of tied to that, this idea of commitment in marriage. And you talked about people that age getting pushed back and more and more and more, and there's not a need there. It's been interesting because I see a lot of men and really young adults in general kind of looking for, when do I become an adult, right? The extended adolescence that has now happened in our culture, where adolescence really just stretches all the way through college and in some relationships continues. When do I get, for guys, when do I get my man card? And there used to be a time where that was when you get married. It used to be, when you move out and you get a job. Yeah. Used to be when you're married. It really isn't anymore. That age is being moved back. And what we've seen, interestingly enough, is a lot of people find their man card in this generation by buying a house. That's something we've seen. Like, when I buy a house, that's when I become an adult man. It's not about when I get married. It's not about when I move out. It's when I become a home buyer, which is really fascinating that has become the standard of what manhood is.
Yeah, research is very clear that individuals, now millennials specifically, that they're again, to talk about that kind of coming of age, one might be able to say, is that there used to be a day that you kind of grew up, you kind of toughed it out with your wife during those beginning years, and then eventually you got rid of the starter home, and then you really established yourself. But now they're moving into a day where you want to be able to establish yourself before you invite somebody else in.
Yeah.
And so that formative process that comes through eating those easy Mac meals, etc., and just toughing it out while you're just hustling, aren't necessarily kind of components of it. Because again, if marriage is a luxury, I'm going to try to provide all the needs, one, and provide a solid foundation before I invite somebody into it. When in reality, it's you're missing out on a lot as well. But there's pluses and minuses to it. But we got to take a break. And so when we come back from the break, we're going to continue talking about the millennial mentality, everything from house buying to locking down in marriage and some of these commitments as well. And so you can call in, or you can leave a little message on Facebook. You can call in at 800-351-1212. Again, that number is 800-351-1212. Or you can hop on over to Facebook, facebook.com/pointofviewradio. Again, facebook.com/pointofviewradio. And for those of you in Facebook land, if you just leave a little comment or question underneath the live video feed, then we'll share what you share online over the air as well. But when we come back, we're going to continue talking about this. I'm very interested in this, namely just because, one, it applies to me, and then two, I think there's some counter arguments that can be made as well. And so just trying to better understand, one, the opposite side, but two, how do we move forward? And we'll be back right after this.
Welcome to the First Liberty Briefing. I'm Jeremy Dice. They were sick of a commercialized Christmas. The presents and general distraction from what they believed to be a season meant to remind us of something deeper led Larry Gallo and his family to look for something different. So they left behind the packages and bows to serve the less fortunate in Central America. Larry's girls are physician's assistants, so it was natural for them to take on a medical missions role. Larry, a maintenance engineer, discovered that the kids in line needed some company. So as his daughters provided the medicine, Larry kept the kids happy. So what's the problem? Well, Larry Gallo is better known as Sergeant Larry Gallo. When the U.S. Air Force featured Gallo's story in one of their publications, an atheist group said the article violated the First Amendment. They even alleged that Gallo's story, quote, emboldens our Islamic enemies because we look like crusaders and it enrages our Islamic allies, unquote. They wanted the article taken down. After a quick internet search recently, I discovered that the article in question is still active on an Air Force website, and it should be. The Air Force should never cave to demands of censoring religion from public view. It should never punish those service members who put service over self, even outside the line of duty. To learn how First Liberty is protecting religious liberty for all Americans, visit firstliberty.org.
Could you lose your career because of your faith? Could your pastor be sued because of his sermons? Can students and teachers be punished because of what they believe about God or what they say? Can the government or even your employer force you to violate your beliefs? Get the answers, and if necessary, legal protection from First Liberty Institutes at firstliberty.org. That's firstliberty.org. If you want hope for religious freedom, go to firstliberty.org.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
And welcome back to Point of View. I am your guest host today, Nick Pitts. I'm joined at the Millennial Roundtable by Kerby Anderson as well as Ben Fuqua of Christ Chapel. And we have been talking about millennials, marriage, house buying, all that is. Kerby, we've been all over the place, right?
I think so, but you guys have brought a lot to the table. This is really good.
There's just so much to talk about.
I want to know when I get my man card, you know?
Yeah.
That was a good one.
Get that one day.
I know. When Ben was talking about extended adolescence, I kept on thinking to myself, well, yeah, I kind of feel like I'm in extended adolescence right now because one day I'm going to be able to shave. That day is just not right.
You and I connect about that.
Yeah,
you and I connect on that.
I've been shaved
one.
in like 3 days, and so I think I am living into an extended adolescence, even though I'm paying my own bills and stuff. But nevertheless, we have been talking about millennials and specifically what Ben has been doing over at Christ Chapel to be able to win, not just to win millennials, but to attract millennials to just the stumbling block message that is Jesus, and really just not just the show me, or not just the tell me, but show me component. There's been so much richness here. But I really want to double down on this, Ben, this idea of commitment, because I think there's a mentality. I'm trying to think about it right now. And so we know that love is more than a feeling, right? We can recognize that. I think that was the great Boston told us, more than a feeling.
Right.
No, you guys don't want me to sing. So we know that it's more than a feeling, but we know feelings are accompanied by it. But then there's this, we don't have to make the false dichotomy of saying that love can't just be feelings, but love is more than just a series of commitments, of cold, calculated commitments in order to protect the beloved. It can be both at the same time. And so there's this reality of, yes, it's feeling, but it's building around a series of commitments together to protect the beloved when there's no longer, the feelings aren't there. And so when you think about millennials and this feeling-based culture, and you're trying to figure out how can you get them to make certain commitments, Are you shying away from those commitments because it seems like that's going to be the biggest detractor? What are you doing to go back to persuading millennials to really contextualizing the gospel in such a way to help them to be able to see that less is more? By saying yes to certain things, you will be saying no to other things, but you're captivated by the yes, the great treasure that is the treasure hidden in a field, which is Jesus. Yeah. What are you doing to be able to help millennials be captivated by those commitments?
Man, that's a good question. We're trying all we can. We have not mastered it. We do not have the market cornered on that. Here's what we're trying to pour our lives out and showing people what that looks like. You know, we're trying to preach in a way that is showing of how beautiful the gospel is, and how transforming it is. We're trying to live our lives and open up our homes in a way. So even tonight, we've got one of our leaders opening up their home, and we're gonna have 80 young adults in their home worshiping Jesus and letting people know that treasure in a field, you know, he sold everything he had in joy to buy that treasure in the field. And it was in joy. And so can we be leaders? Can we be people who are living our lives in joy to say that by doing full-time ministry, there's some sacrifices that my wife and I are making on a daily basis, weekly, yearly basis. There's some things that our kids won't have that if I would have gone a different career path. But it is my joy to do that. And so I think walking alongside, inviting millennials into our home, into our life, other leaders, older leaders, anybody who loves the gospel and loves this younger generation, to say, let me show you how in joy I will sell everything I have because Jesus is that much better than what the world is offering. And I think when people see that, they'll get committed to that. They'll follow that, and they'll realize that treasure is more valuable, and I want to sell it.
I think that something you just said just spurred a series of thoughts. So I promise I was paying attention, but in another side of my brain, I was also thinking about some other things as well. And like I'm captivated by the vision from Matthew 13:44 again. The man goes into the field and finds the treasure. It's only then that he sells everything in joy to be able to buy the treasure hidden in the field. And, you know, Kerby, there used to be a day in a previous generation where individuals, when they moved to a city, they joined the church the very first Sunday.
Right.
And then they made their way into it. And now it seems as though millennials, they need to go all the way in. They need to see the treasure before they commit themselves to losing the treasure. And it's just and again, I know the illustration breaks down, but it's especially from the Baptist church perspective, where and I'm not saying that Baptist churches need to say you need to get rid of your regulations to say that you can be a non-member and teach a Bible study class, et cetera, et cetera. But I am saying that millennials largely are different, and they want to see what you're about before they commit themselves to joining you.
That's true.
Is that an accurate characterization?
I hadn't thought about it that way, but I think you're right on. I think there really is an element of, you know, let me see if this really is the treasure worth, you know, and I think that's really astute.
Yeah. And I think, and there's a part of it too, where you're just thinking to yourself that millennials, I mean, like you've just continued to reiterate, there are certain instances like you're opening up, you're providing opportunities for hospitality. You're opening up your homes. It seems as though you're providing opportunities for millennials to be able to see the gospel lived out.
Absolutely.
And just everyday church members. So it's not just ministers, because you were talking about members. Are there other opportunities that you're pursuing at Christ Chapel whereby individuals are really able to see, millennials specifically, are able to see the gospel lived out through service and through life?
Yeah, you mean specifically Christ Chapel?
Yeah. Are you thinking about those things, or just
we've got? I think ownership. The more opportunities we can have to have ownership and access.
Yeah.
If they can have access to us, right, the person who's on stage, or the leaders, or the adults, or the, you know, whoever it is, senior leadership. If we can create access to them, then that allows us to be authentic with them and let them see if we're genuinely walking with Jesus. And then ownership too, giving them roles, giving them ownership of, hey, if they come up with an idea to reach their coworkers, empowering them to do that, giving them roles within the ministry. We also have a residency program at Christ Chapel, which is a neat thing where kind of post-college residents step into a year-long discipleship program. And I partner with our Grow pastor there at Christ Chapel, and we just try to disciple them and give them. And one of the big things with residency, they have access to everything.
That's great.
They got access. They do hunting trips with our senior pastor. They're in our executive pastor's office. They have access to our church and to our leaders, and we kind of open up the curtain and say, here's who we are.
So if I'm hearing you correctly, and again, this is what we all know, but I think it's just really important for us to emphasize in our current age, is that for millennials, the gospel has to be more than a message that's proclaimed. It has to be a way of life lived. And so for individuals, millennials want to join something bigger than themselves, and they want to join something bigger than simply just, now I'm not diminishing the proclamation of the gospel message, but there has to be greater implications than simply just the proclamation of the gospel.
Absolutely.
There has to be a way of life that they can be seen not simply as just saying that Jesus lives and he's resurrected, but what does it look like to extend the kingdom walls into the darkness? And I think that's what millennials are wanting.
Show them that.
Yeah.
Don't just tell. The gospel is everything.
Yeah.
Don't just tell them. Show them that.
Yeah.
Invite them into your life. Invite them into your church. And the pushback of that is, but when you invite millennials in, they're critical of everything and they think they know better. And oh man, they're late and they dress like slackers. Yes. All of those things. Yes. But as church leaders, you still have to ask, but do you want them?
Yeah.
Do you want them? Yeah. They're going to be a pain at times. They're going to be a thorn, but they are the future of the church. And if we don't invite them now, then the future of the church is bleak.
Yeah, it's like, what's the C.S. Lewis quote? Like, God has forgiven the inexcusable in us, therefore he can forgive the inexcusable in all of us kind of mentality. And so, well, Ben, it has been such a joy to have you with us here for this first hour. Tell us a little bit more information, where they can find out more information about you as well as Christ Chapel.
Yeah, so Christ Chapel is in Fort Worth. If you're ever in Fort Worth and you're not worshiping somewhere, come and check us out. They can go to the website, Christ Chapel. I don't even know what it is. ccbcfamily.org.
Okay.
That's what it is.
Okay, yeah,
so it'll be on our website. Check it out. Or Renovate is the name of our Wednesday night ministry that we're really just trying to reach Fort Worth. We're trying to reach young adults in Fort Worth. It's called Renovate. It's renovatefw.org. And come and worship with us and get plugged into other young adults if you're a young adult out there.
Well, that's phenomenal. Well, Ben, thank you so much for joining us. And again, you can find out more information about Ben as well as Christ Chapel on the website, pointofview.net. But when we come back, we'll take a break. But when we come back, we're going to continue talking a little bit about millennials, but also really just the millennial perspective on everything from the tariffs and the trade war that's happening right now to really just this home buying. And so I'll be really interested to talk to Kerby. And also, Chelsey doesn't know this yet, but I want to talk to her about the abortion and about pro-life and how, especially with these new Supreme Court, the new Supreme Court that could potentially be running and ruling, what that looks like for the abortion industry relative to over-the-mail infant kind of prescription pills. And so we're going to have to take a break, but when we come back, more on this. We'll be back right after this.
Point of View Radio has been changing lives for a generation. Listeners have been inspired to apply themselves in all kinds of ways, to stand up as lawyers defending the Constitution and freedom, to start Christian schools, training up a new generation, to launch ministries on college campuses, even to run for and serve in Congress. So again, what are you doing to make a positive change? One way to start today is to join the Truth Team, Truth Team 360, and help us change lives. Our nation needs a Truth Team very badly. Support Point of View Radio today at pointofview.net. Set up your monthly gift by clicking the Truth Team 360 picture and then carefully follow the directions. pointofview.net. By phone, you can give at 1-800-347-5151, 800-347-5151, or mail that first donation to Point of View, Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221, Box 30, Dallas 75221. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kerby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of view, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. Each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging. Apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now,
Nick Fitz.
And welcome to Point of View on this Wednesday, July 25th, 2018 day, National Hot Fudge Sunday Day.
That's a good one.
I had to come out with it, and so I'm your host, Nick Pitts. I'm joined at the Millennial Roundtable with Kerby Anderson, and now joining us, Ben Fuqua has left us from Christ Chapel. We now have here in the second hour the one, the only Chelsey Youman of the First Liberty Institute. Chelsey, how are you?
I'm good today.
Yeah, perhaps the better title for Chelsey, the distinguishing mark, is not so much First Liberty Institute as much as the mother of Foster.
He keeps me on my toes. That's right. My number one job.
Mother to be for
baby number 2 here pretty soon.
Yes, we finally decided a name, we can call him Crawford now.
Crawford.
Yes.
I love that.
Foster and Crawford.
That's great. There's a ranch.
You're
going
to get outnumbered, though.
I'm outnumbered now, but I get my spa days in every now and then, so I'm okay.
I feel good about that. Well, so good. We are so glad you've decided to join us. I'm so glad the listeners have decided to tune in. We've got quite the hour ahead of us. We're going to be talking about everything from the trade war that's happening right now, and specifically what happened yesterday relative to the $12 billion in emergency aid that is going to be released. One might call it a bailout, or specifically, since it's dealing with a farm, a bail out. Get it? It's a farm.
That was good.
Yeah, you can't. Maybe it's better for the eye and not necessarily for the ear. But nevertheless, we'll be talking about that, and we'll be taking some of your phone calls as well about that. Was that a good thing that the government did? Was that a good thing that the Trump administration did? Should there have been a different action, i.e. pull back from the trade war and the tariffs that are going down? We'll be taking some of your phone calls, some of your questions, your comments. You can do that online as well on Facebook.com/PointOfViewRadio, or you can do that over the phone as well, 800-351-1212. Again, that number is 800-351-1212. Or you can access the article that we'll be kind of referencing during this time at pointofview.net. If you go to pointofview.net, you'll see that Wednesday, July 25th, and you can just click See More, and you'll see more of those articles that we'll be talking about, everything from tariffs to home prices to just everything that, even Demi Lovato. We'll be talking about the tragedy that happened with Demi Lovato yesterday and just how endemic and how it epitomizes what's happening across the U.S. relative to overdose as well. But without further ado, let's jump into it, shall we? So yesterday, the Trump administration announced that it would provide up to $12 billion in emergency relief for farmers hurt by the president's trade war. The actions today, according to Sonny Perdue, who's the Secretary of Agriculture, are, quote, a firm statement that other nations cannot bully our agricultural producers to force the United States to cave in. Response to the aid package has been mixed, but also pretty consistent, led by even usually the Senator Rand Paul is usually siding with President Trump. Pretty frequently, he tweeted, quote, tariffs are taxes that punish American consumers and producers. The answer is to remove the tariffs. And Chelsey, it's just so interesting because what we find ourselves with right now is just this discontentment, because we know that what was happening before President Trump relative to trade was not ideal. And now there are many that are voicing their dissent as to these tariffs that are meant to try to rectify the wrongs that were done beforehand. But many are saying that this is just the wrong solution, period, that he's provided.
Right. So I think that most everyone is being presented with what looks like more of a dualistic option. So you only have two options here. We're either pro-tariff or pro-free trade. And those those are the two options to choose between. But this is really nuanced. I mean, this is economic theory. So there are nuances here to look at. And I actually started to look at them this morning because I knew we were going to be talking about this and really wanted to look at some history. What does history have to teach us? We've had eras of strong tariffs before and eras of strong with free trade before, and kind of what were the implications of both of those. So not to bore everyone, but we've been here before. And overall, I think Adam Smith is the one that I look to really help guide me, because he wrote Wealth of Nations, which we all know he's kind of the father of capitalism. And capitalism is very, very strong on the Republican agenda and conservative agenda in general, but libertarians as well. So essentially the goal here, he said, should not be a long-term goal when it involves tariffs. It should really be a short-term goal. That tariffs serve a purpose and a very specific purpose, but the ideal equilibrium we want is free trade, open trade with other countries. It breeds, industry and wealth and creativity in our products. And it gives mostly the consumer lots and lots of options out there. And the consumers get to decide which products they want to choose to invest in. And that's a really healthy competition to have. And so to foster that, you really do need free trade. And Bush in 2008 finished finalizing the rest of his free trade agreements. I'm biased because I actually was working for the administration at the time on free trade agreements. So it's a little bit of history there. But all that to say that really the small, nuanced reason that increased tariffs should be used, according to Adam Smith, is out of retaliation, frankly, to other countries who are using tariffs and duties to stifle our economic exchange. And so it's usually that he uses the word retaliation and revenge. It's a retaliation mechanism, but the goal of which should be to open those industries and markets to us. And so the goal should not be us versus them permanently. And the goal should not be to just have longstanding tariffs to stop trade with other countries. The goal should be temporarily and effectively. It's really just, it's a negotiation tactic, and it's to bring them back to the table to get us on an equal playing field to reopen up those free markets. And so in that context, I think that I would really be supportive of certain tariffs. But these wholesale issues where we're just saying these are indefinite tariffs, there's no end in sight, we really need some clearer goals, I think, from the president for me to be able to get on board, and to also be willing to put up with the consequences of tariffs, which are going to be harmed industries.
Yeah, I mean, Kerby, I think she brings up a really great point. One, we've got to probably tighten up the scope a little bit, because it's a very different situation when it comes to China than when it comes to Canada right now. And so it needs for us to be able to nuance it to where tariffs on China might be really, really different. Our posture towards that might be different than our posture towards Canada and our posture towards the EU specifically as well. And so there needs to be some bit of nuance with that. But also, there are many individuals, there used to be a conservative vein of thought that I think Rand Paul, Ben Sass, et cetera, are arguing that tariffs, I don't want to say regardless, but tariffs are not the right solution. I think many are arguing right now.
Well, and again, there are some interesting responses. Republicans have called it welfare. Chuck Schumer said it's a Soviet-style program, which I thought was kind of over the top, but that doesn't surprise me at all. But a lot of it has to do with what Chelsey just said a minute ago, and since we're coming to a break, I won't go into a lot of detail, but there are individuals that are going to suffer more than others. As they say in West Texas, if you throw a rock in the pile of dogs, the one that got hit is the one that yelped the loudest.
Yeah.
And right now, it's Kentucky bourbon that affects people like Rand Paul, or it's Harley Davidson motorcycles, or of course it's the issue of agriculture. And right now that $12 billion is to help those in agriculture, either by buying their crops, which again just looks like welfare or something like that, or to give them some kind of price supports. But if indeed you can bring about some changes, that's the case. And one of those changes we already saw is South Korea. Once they realized we were serious about tariffs, they sort of backed off. Maybe Canada will back off. Do you think China's backing off anytime soon?
I don't think so.
And that could affect the elections, which I know you want to talk about after the break.
So we'll talk a little bit more about tariffs and the tariff situation and how President Trump has continued to tout this whole idea of trade deficit. And then inevitably we'll get into the political game of it, as well as the implications on the 2018. But we'll be back right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
You know, we seem to be witnessing the decline of governmentally sanctioned compelled speech. 3 Supreme Court decisions and the prospect of a new justice on the High Court are the reasons. As we discuss so often on the Point of View radio talk show, compelled speech is perhaps the worst form of anti-free speech. It is bad enough to censor an American citizen from being able to express his or her opinion, but it's even worse to force an American citizen to voice, create, or fund contrary ideas or activities. The Supreme Court ruled against the state of Colorado for punishing Christian baker Jack Phillips. He was fined for refusing to use his artistic talents for a homosexual ceremony, and Justice Kennedy was appalled that the Colorado bureaucrats described the baker's faith as the most despicable pieces of rhetoric that people can use. The court also ruled against the state of California for mandating that a pro-life pregnancy center must advertise for free abortions. In addition to the majority opinion written by Justice Thomas, was a concurring opinion by Justice Kennedy that encouraged the legislators to go back and read the Bill of Rights. In a third case, the justices ruled against an Illinois law that forced state employees to subsidize public employee unions that take political and labor positions contrary to the views of the employees. Justice Alito twice quoted the famous phrase from Thomas Jefferson that to compel a man to furnish contributions of money for the propagation of opinions which he disbelieves and abhors is sinful and tyrannical. The new justice on the court is likely to uphold each one of these precedents and will continue to rule against other examples of compelled speech. That is why it is reasonable to expect to see a decline in these attempts to force people to voice, create, or fund ideas contrary to their deeply held beliefs. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Take Kerby and the Point of View team with you on the go with the Point of View app. Search for Point of View Radio at the Apple or Google Play stores.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
And welcome back to Point of View. I'm your host, Nick Pitts. I'm joined at the Millennial Roundtable by Kerby Anderson and Chelsey Youman of the First Liberty Institute, also with Foster. But we have been talking. This is one of those instances, I don't know if you were listening last week, where I said, sometimes I wish we could just turn the microphones on during the break because there would be so much robust conversation I think would be beneficial. But nevertheless, that was one of those instances. So I'm going to yield it over to Kerby because Kerby, right now, I'm thinking to myself, like President Trump continues to tout this idea that there's these trade deficits numbering up to $800 billion. We're losing all of this money. And then there's a kind of a conservative thought over the years that have been tariffs are a bad solution. As to quote the great Taylor Swift, they're a Band-Aid on a bullet hole. And they're not necessarily the great solutions that are necessary to be able to perpetuate flourishing and a thriving economy. And so help us to be able to make sense of this right now, because even there are some that are going to raise the question that, is this even constitutional for a president to be acting?
I'm glad you brought that up. You know, first of all, we'll probably get Dr. Merrill Matthews on because he's written a very good piece about that, and I've got a commentary coming out in the future, so you've already anticipated that. First of all, historically, how did we get to a point where we allowed the president to actually enact tariffs? 2 words, Smoot-Hawley. Yep. 1930s, okay? But let's go all the way back to the Constitution. Article 1, Section 8 actually says in the Constitution that Congress shall have the power to lay and collect taxes. And if Rand Paul is correct, and I know that he is, a tariff is a tax. So guess who has the responsibility to actually implement tariffs? Congress. How did we get to a point where the president is doing that? Twofold. Number one, Congress is quite willing to defer all sorts of things to other branches. Look at the number of decisions, as
Chelsey can speak to better than any of us, in which the judicial branch is making decisions that Congress should have made. Mm-hmm. Everything from desegregation to busing to affirmative action to abortion to same-sex marriage, religious liberty. Courts have taken all sorts of things that Congress should have dealt with. Well, at the same time, Congress has also been willing to let the executive branch, especially when they like the president, to take over certain things. And so the president for some time has been able to enact certain tariffs, Richard Nixon and a few others. But there's something else that's even more egregious. Can I use that word? Troublesome. Or the big word of the day is problematic. And that is the fact that we're saying that these are security measures. Now, a tariff against Canada is a security measure because Canada is a threat to the United States. I can't even say that with a straight face.
I don't know if you've ever seen them hyped up on maple syrup, but you do not want to mess with Canadians.
So anyway, I want to hear what Chelsey has to say, but I just wanted to give a little historical perspective because this is really not in the purview of the president's power.
It sounds like an originalist argument is being made.
There we go.
Yes, wow. The Democrats can get on board with, which really gets me exactly. Common ground, guys. No, you're absolutely right. I think where for lack of a better term, the defection of duty was done by Congress was to FDR at the time, because it's not entirely out of the purview of the Constitution, because the president is granted authority over foreign powers and negotiations. And so how this plays out practically is free trade agreements. They count as a treaty. The president is charged with negotiating those with the foreign powers. That's his constitutional duty, is to negotiate them. He has to consult with Congress within a certain amount of days beforehand and afterhand. There needs to be a clear agenda. Then he submits his free trade agreement proposal to Congress, and it undergoes the bill becomes a law process, and Congress has to adopt it. So that's kind of the standard for free trade agreements. In the tariff realm, for some reason, it is treated a little bit differently, and the president, by statute, has been given authority to withdraw for really a whole host of reasons, really anything. If we're in war, it doesn't even have to be the country we're in war with. We can raise tariffs. National emergencies, temporarily under the Trade Act, and specific industries, which is what's happening here, are allowed to have tariffs on them. So it's been treated really differently than free trade agreements. And I think what we're seeing is a hope across our country that Congress will get involved and take back that authority that they gave over to FDR. It's a big government concept. It's a big federal concept that really is Congress's responsibility to take back.
Okay, so what I'm thinking, so according to the Tax Foundation, they had an analysis that they ran. If all the proposed tariffs take effect, they would cost Americans approximately $118 billion. I'm going to say that one more time. $118 billion. Billion with a B. Billion with this. That it also is. No, I'm just kidding. $818 billion and 364,000 jobs would be lost if all the tariffs were enacted. And so think about that from the perspective, right? So you have got the president who has approved $12 billion, but if all the tariffs are enacted, it will cost us $118 billion based upon analysis. If we think AgriPulse also had a key statistic right now, when they found out that the president had approved this $12 billion in aid. Well, when you look at simply just the soybean farmers, when you look at the corn and wheat farmers, this year alone, since the trade war started, they've already lost $13 billion. So that's still $1 billion that they've already lost if all of them just get those measures. And so this really is it just seems as though it's not very conducive. Now you're thinking about it from a biblical perspective, there's a couple of different avenues. And so there's on one side that's going to say, the Wayne Grudem side is what I'll argue. He's going to argue that the government that seeks to be a servant for the good should seek to reduce tariffs and eliminate them altogether based upon Romans 13:4. But then there's another side that's going to argue that simply the government is trying to produce justice and trying to right wrongs and perpetuate it through copyright infringement, i.e. China, as well as currency manipulation, i.e. China as well. And so we find ourselves just in this pickle, one might be able to say. We're just in a pickle, which, again, would probably be able to get an aid because it's being tariffed. There's a tariff on a pickle right now.
Just probably not.
Cucumbers, though. Cucumbers, I'm sure we're exporting cucumbers. I know here in Texas we export quite a bit of cotton.
One question I want to put on the table is, will that have an impact on the Senate elections? And I wanted to pick out two states, Tennessee, which is your home state, and Missouri. I'll do Missouri since you know Tennessee only so well, and that is you got Josh Hawley running right now, but they're running ads against him, who's running against the incumbent Claire McCaskill. Now, we have a number of listeners in Missouri, and they're well aware that this tariff issue could prevent him from unseating her. And then you have an open seat in Tennessee. Tell us that one.
Yeah, so we've got Tennessee as well. You've got Bob Corker, who is the chair of the Foreign Relations Committee, is resigning. So you've got Phil Bredesen, who's the Democratic candidate, has got a pretty strong record because he's served as a pretty popular governor as well as a pretty popular mayor of Nashville. And then also on the Republican side, you've got Marsha Blackburn, who many of our listeners are aware of. Marsha Blackburn has just been a champion for pro-life issues. She was a champion and really led a lot of the efforts in the Kermit Gosnell just tragedy in Philadelphia a few years back. And so it's going to be a very robust race. And right now polls indicate that it's getting pretty tight, but Phil Bredesen has got the lead. But when you think about it, Chelsey, I mean, that's huge. The fact that Phil Bredesen has the lead, especially in a red state like Tennessee that has been red federally for so long, for the past at least 15 years, and President Trump won by double digits. The fact that a Democrat, especially a state that has such a great investment in soybeans, is experiencing this hurt right now, I mean, that just doesn't look good, I would say, from the Republican standpoint.
Yes, but you're talking to the optimist, so it doesn't look good is in the eye of the beholder.
Yeah.
Look, they have mega majorities in the House and Senate in Tennessee. Very predominantly red state. And I think we've been seeing this a lot even in Texas. There's this Turn Texas Blue slogan that's going around, and there are these polls being released, and when you really dig into the polls, they're kind of like these minute factions that they've actually asked questions to that are, I don't know that the polls are accurate at the state level coming out of Texas at the very least. So there's no doubt in my mind Texas is not going blue. We're just not. So for me, I'm very skeptical when I look at some of that polling data. Don't know where it's come from. I have to admit, I'll be the first to admit I'm not following the Tennessee race extremely closely like I should be. But as the optimist in the group, voters have to think this through, right? Mm-hmm. So by electing your new senator in the state of Tennessee one way or another, it's not going to change tariffs. Mm-hmm. It's not going to change the economy. It's not going to change these trade wars that that are amping up. Very practically speaking, that's a Trump call, and that's an executive decision at this point in time until Congress chooses to get involved. And so, I don't think this should be the determining factor. Although we know economics always plays a role in politics. I actually think Trump's reelection hinges more on the economy than maybe these state Senate races.
That's a great point. And I think it's really important because I think you alluded to it, or maybe there's an insinuation with it, is that I don't think most people are checking in right now, right? Like the average voter is not paying attention to
their decisions yet.
What the Trump administration's done relative to Farm Bill. And it really is going to be a sense of, do I feel better, right? There's so much of a feeling component based on when I go.
And I don't want our listeners to get discouraged. I mean, we're winning. Republican issues across the board. I mean, for lack of a better term, across the board for 8 years, our issues suffered, and now we're seeing change.
Yeah. Okay. So we're gonna continue this conversation, but we're gonna have to take a break. And when we come back from break, we're gonna add Emily Cassil to the mix, who's also a millennial, to help us kind of figure out more of the millennial perspective on this and host more when we come back.
We live in a digital generation. Point of View is reaching this often overly plugged-in generation with truth. You can keep up with us 24 hours a day using your phone, your tablet, your laptop, or your desktop. Search for the Point of View Radio Talk Show on Facebook, where you can keep up with today's issues, learn about current and upcoming guests by liking us on Facebook. Also, follow us on Twitter. Our handle is @PointOfViewRTS. That stands for Point of View Radio Talk Show. Learn, interact, make a difference with Point of View using new media. And here's one way you can make a big difference. Help us increase our reach by spreading the word among your friends. Share a Facebook post. Tag us in a tweet. With enough joining us to plant seeds, we'll see a tremendous harvest. Come on, it only takes a minute. Search for Point of View Radio Talk Show on Facebook, @PointOfViewRTS on Twitter, and subscribe to the Point of View Radio Talk Show channel on YouTube. Learn, interact, share. The Point of View Radio Talk Show. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is
Nick Pitts.
And welcome back to Point of View. I'm your host, Nick Pitts, and we have been talking about Republican politics. Specifically, we've been talking about the trade war and how the Trump administration approved an aid package to farmers numbering up to $12 billion. And we have been going back and forth on that, but I just need you to know, I'm going to need to trade in that conversation. Do you see what I did there, Chelsey?
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to trade in that conversation.
A free trade?
And hopefully you will aid me in helping us talk about millennial issues. Do you see? I'm so close clever, right? No, she's not.
Geez.
She doesn't think so. Okay, we're going to switch over to millennial issues. And so obviously I've got Chelsey Youman of the First Liberty Institute, mom of Foster and Crawford that is making his way into the world. But then also we're joined by the Point of View intern of the year, of the century, I'm going to argue. We've got Emily Cassil here. Emily, how are you?
I'm good, thank you. I think I'm the only Point of View intern, so that's not a high
of the century,
goal.
Of the century,
okay,
though. So
there you go.
easily has made this world so much better behind the scenes, and has just made life so much easier for us. And so, Emily, tell us, our listeners, a little bit about yourself. Where are you from? Where are you going to school? Et cetera, et cetera. Life plans. What do you want to be doing in 10 years from now? Et cetera.
I'm not sure I have thought that far ahead. I'm obtaining BA degrees in communications and political science. And next year, I'm going to be traveling to Scotland to intern for a member of the Scottish National Party.
Really?
Mm-hmm.
Scottish National. Tell us a little bit about that. What does that look like? It's fascinating.
I don't know yet. I just got my member of parliament that I'm going to be interning for. And I haven't really had time to look him up, but I do know it'll be an interesting time to be in a party that wants to back away from Britain.
Yeah.
So.
Okay, so help me to understand this, because Chelsey and I have talked about this a little bit, and Chelsey and I are fish out of water, and it's good to know that there's another fish out of water, because it seems like so many millennials have backed away from the political process. Mm-hmm. They've backed away from political engagement, and then, but then also from the other extent, there's not as many conservatives, millennials, as there has been in the past as well. Right. There's just been this discontent, one might be able to say. And so help us give words to it, help our listeners better understand, why is it that millennials, one, are largely backing away from the political process? Do you think? Help our listeners just better understand politics from a millennial perspective that might be more jaded and discontent with it.
Yeah, well, I think Ben was just talking about how millennials really want transparency, and I think that's something that's been lacking, especially in the last political election. There was so much scandal that came out, so many lies, and they're really just fed up with it. So I think they're running away from the Republican Party, but I did some research. I just wrote the last edition of the Outlook article for Point of View. And I found that between the end of 2015 and 2017, 23% of Republican millennials left the party. Wow. So I don't think that suddenly just 23% of young Republicans started hating the Republican platforms or conservative values, but I think it's something about the way that the party's run right now. And I have some theories about that too. But.
Oh, okay. Chelsey, when you hear 23% of millennials have left the Republican Party from during those 2 years, what are some of the things that come to your head?
Well, that's obviously a lot. I mean, that's a pretty big percentage of an entire generation. But when I think about it, I also think, I was talking to someone in my office today, and he was saying that a lot of times when parties are not in control, they begin to have identity crisis. We had 8 years to really kind of wait and try to stop others, oppose basically other ideologies and issues. And then now we're trying to say, who are we as a party and what are our ideals, and really get back to our basics and our fundamentals. And there's going to be a tension there and a discussion to be had. So I think it's not altogether surprising that while they waited in the ranks for the Republican Party to take control again, which we now have, that there were those who defected from the Republican Party and didn't like what they saw. And I think that the Republican Party has been more divided than ever. And maybe, we'll see. I would be curious to know what the number is now, if more are coming.
Yeah. So tell us a little bit, Emily, your working theories right now. When you were writing that article, because I know just being a writer, there's just naturally, you can't put everything you want down on the paper because you're limited by a word count. Right. But there's all those, you're doing all that research, and it's just spinning around all these theories and hypotheses in your head. So help us better understand, what are some of those theories you were thinking about relative to millennials leaving the Republican Party from 2015 to 2017?
Right. I think a lot of it has to do with just the way that Republicans are using social media.
Oh, wow. Okay.
I would be interested to look at some research, but I would tend to say that at least the liberal leaders are doing a better job of using social media right now. Even just when you look at Barack Obama's Twitter versus President Trump's Twitter, you can see the giant difference in their civility and the way that they speak online. And I think that there's a social media etiquette that young people have kind of created that dictates that it's not a free-for-all. It's not a place to just rant your opinions to other people, but it's a place make your identity, to show the values that you care about, and to be civil while doing all of that.
Yeah.
And that's something, of course, that I think President Trump is leading the charge in not doing correctly, and that does not resonate well with young people.
Yeah, that's fascinating. So if you looked at my social media account, it would reveal my character of, man, this guy likes a lot of weird videos. No, maybe not. Apparently you're not following me on Twitter, Chelsey.
I'm probably not. I'm not on Twitter. So
I feel like
it's a good chance I'm not following you on Twitter.
That's a deep wound. I'm going to need some time to heal from that. But it does. You bring up a really good underlying point, because social media I think is a part of it too. I think there's individuals that are utilizing it really well. I think about Ben Sass and the Republican Party. I think about Orrin Hatch that's using it really well. When I think about governors, I think Governor Haslam in Tennessee is using it. Governor Abbott too. Governor Abbott's a really great tweeter. He's a great tweeter for our state. Does that sound wrong?
Maybe I should get on Twitter.
Yeah, I think you need to join the tweet wagon. I don't know if it's a wagon. That's kind of weird. But you do bring up a good point, Emily. I want to press down on this, because there's that civility thing that many individuals are kind of talking about right now, and it's not just and hear our listeners. It's not just a left thing or a right thing. I mean, it's just we're just lack civility holistically. I think that's a fair characterization right now. But it is important, especially from the Christian perspective, for us to not only be willing to speak truth, but also be willing to extend grace and saturate grace.
Right.
And it doesn't seem like that's a part of the social media experience right now for many people.
I think one of the main problems is that young people aren't seeing all of those other Republicans on Twitter. They're only following Trump, and they're only seeing his rash comments. And of course, a lot of the media makes it look like that is all Republicans. And it's not, but that's kind of the picture that they're painting, is that Republicans are racist, sexist, and that's very disconcerting in a time when young people want to champion the disadvantaged, and really show that they care about those who are less fortunate.
Yeah.
And of course, that's not the truth about all Republicans.
Yeah, and
that's what it seems like.
Just like we wouldn't say, especially Chelsey would be resonant with this. We wouldn't say that all Christians are known because of Westboro Baptist Church, right? Like to characterize Christians by Westboro Baptist Church is to say that this piece of cheese represents all of ham.
But I do think that's being done. To be fair, I think that's exactly the narrative that's being portrayed publicly, whether it's in universities and schools, but. Really, remember, after Trump won, we were now a nation considered to be racist. Yeah. I mean, by all left accounts and the media and everything we were hearing, it was like, well, then America must be racist because they elected Trump. I mean, those broad brushstrokes and stereotypes are definitely being, portrayed. And I think it would be really, really hard to be young and in some of those academic environments and have to constantly be fending off those defenses and making defenses. So I can definitely see how that would have impacted people's willingness to associate with the Republican Party.
So what's working relative to millennials and the conservative movement right now? What's keeping millennials in the conservative movement? What's causing millennials to be drawn to the conservative movement? What do you say? What's some best practices for some of our listeners right now that might be trying to ask themselves, what's actually working among millennial conservatives right now?
Yeah. Well, I think the good thing about millennials is that they are known for tolerance, quote unquote, but that does, in my experience, extend to people whose beliefs differ from theirs. So, of course, I'm kind of an outlier in my university because I do hold more conservative beliefs. But I found that there hasn't been really any one of my friends who's not been open to speaking with me and speaking with me civilly. They really actually want to hear what I have to say. And at first they might think, oh, you're a Republican. Does that mean you're a racist? But the more I speak with them and the more I open up with them, they really enjoy hearing me speak about my point of view. So I guess I would just say that I think it's important to keep talking to people and proving those stereotypes wrong, just as millennials have to work to overcome negative stereotypes that they have. I think Republicans have to do the same.
Yeah,
and show more love and care for people.
Yeah, so it's not just a tell me, it's also a show me as well. And so it's I guess the best way to beat hate speech would be more speech, I guess, from a First Amendment standpoint. And not that I'm a lawyer, but nevertheless, we've got to take a break right now. But when we come back from the break, we're going to open up the phone lines, and you can call in if you've got a question about millennials or kind of the conservative movement right now, or millennials' involvement in the conservative movement. We'll have Emily here for the next segment as well. So you can call in at 800-351-1212. Again, that number is 800-351-1212. or you can hop over on Facebook, facebook.com/pointofviewradio, and you can leave a little question or comment right underneath the live video box, and then what you leave online, we'll share over the air as well. But when we come back, more about millennials and conservatives. We'll be right after this.
Welcome to the First Liberty Briefing. I'm Jeremy Dice. They were sick of a commercialized Christmas. The presence and general distraction from what they believed to be a season meant to remind us of something deeper led Larry Gallo and his family to look for something different. So they left behind the packages and bows to serve the less fortunate in Central America. Larry's girls are physician's assistants, so it was natural for them to take on a medical missions role. Larry, a maintenance engineer, discovered that the kids in line needed some company. So as his daughters provided the medicine, Larry kept the kids happy. So what's the problem? Well, Larry Gallo is better known as Sergeant Larry Gallo. When the U.S. Air Force featured Gallo's story in one of their publications, an atheist group said the article violated the First Amendment. They even alleged that Gallo's story, quote, emboldens our Islamic enemies because we look like crusaders and it enrages our Islamic allies, unquote. They wanted the article taken down. After a quick internet search recently, I discovered that the article in question is still active on an Air Force website, and it should be. The Air Force should never cave to demands of censoring religion from public view. It should never punish those service members who put service over self, even outside the line of duty. To learn how First Liberty is protecting religious liberty for all Americans, visit firstliberty.org.
Could you lose your career because of your faith? Could your pastor be sued because of his sermons? Can students and teachers be punished because of what they believe about God or what they say? Can the government or even your employer force you to violate your beliefs? Get the answers, and if necessary, legal protection from First Liberty Institutes at firstliberty.org. That's firstliberty.org. If you want hope for religious freedom, go to firstliberty.org.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
And welcome back to Point of View. I am your host today, Nick Pitts. I am joined at the Millennial Roundtable by Emily Cassil, as well as Chelsey Youman of the First Liberty Institute. And we have been talking about millennials and the conservative movement. And, you know, it's funny, Emily, I'll be sharing with the group about this on Saturday as well. And, you know, there's kind of a characteristic phrase that's being used right now relative to millennials and kind of conservatives. It's this idea of owning the libs or drinking liberal tears is kind of two phrases that are being perpetuated out there right now. And it's really to the extent that it's kind of the mic drop, right? Making an argument, making a point in an accentuating fashion in order to denigrate the other one person and make yourself feel superior. And it seems as though that's like taking fire right now among millennials, especially in the conservative movement. Do you see that as just kind of is that a wildfire, or is that just like a little flame that eventually is going to burn out?
I hope it's a little flame. I don't know. I can't really be sure, but I do know that the tweets and the social media stuff that's getting the most attention are the ones that are very civil, not the ones that are in all caps yelling at people. And you can see that I looked at the top tweets from 2017, and Barack Obama's tweets made the list over and over again,
Really?
and Trump's were barely on there.
Wow.
Which I think is fascinating because Trump's are so boisterous, and you'd think that everyone would be looking at them, but I think young people still are liking the tweets that just resonate with them, or oh, that's cute, or it makes them feel passionate about something, but not in an angry way.
Yeah, that's fascinating to say that. So you studied the tweets from 2017, and the ones that were most tweeted were the ones that showed civility, or the ones that were most interacted with. I guess you would say that you measured based on like and retweeting. Wow, that's kind of shocking, Chelsey, because it seems as though we're living in like kind of a crazier time in which, in order to be known, you have to do something that traditionally causes you to rise above the others. And I wouldn't have thought that civility would have been such a big thing, especially in 2017.
I definitely think it's a generation thing.
Yeah.
So, we know that a lot of those who actually vote and go to the polls. So it's one thing, I think, to like look at Twitter and read these tweets and interact with them. It's another thing to say, well, how are people voting, or are they voting at all, actually? But when it came to those who voted for Trump, it was predominantly older generations that voted for him, generations that maybe they're more experienced, they've seen a lot more, they've been involved in politics a lot more, and for that reason, maybe the same people who are fed up, millennials are known for being fed up with kind of like this fake advertisement marketing culture. They really want authenticity, and that's actually what a lot of the voters who voted for Trump voted for, was authenticity. Now, it's not civil authenticity, but it is authenticity. The things Trump is saying is no holds bar. So, it might be the way that the generations that's manifesting differently throughout both generations. But I would say that it's interesting to me. There's a common ground there, at least.
Yeah, that's fascinating. I keep on thinking that, there's the civility component, but there's also the authenticity, and just how refreshing. And so maybe the reason why it would make sense, okay, so it does make sense, because when you think about it, what's like one of the top documentaries right now that's like leaps and bounds any other documentary? You've got Fred Rogers, right? Won't You Be My Neighbor right now? And just that civility that seems so strange in our culture today, but yet like moths to a light, right? We're flocking to it right now, just because, one, it's strange, but the reason why it's so strange is because it's preciously almost endangered in our culture today.
Well, and we've seen that trend before, whether it's this issue or partisan or not, in a nonpartisan way, really, to look at it. It's kind of like we all want what we're not seeing. So, part of the political theory I see going around, that they're theorizing that Trump was elected because he embodied everything Obama was not. Yeah. He looked strong. He did not look weak. He spoke his mind. He was very upfront about all of the reasons that he was elected were because that's not what we had in a president for 8 years, regardless of partisan politics. And so maybe the tide will swing the other way, where now that we're not having as much civil discourse or like high level political theory and thought and debate, maybe it'll swing the other way.
Who knows? But I do think it's very interesting, just because, again, I would be a huge fan of the civility component, especially just from a Christian perspective. One, of the idea that it's not necessarily just what I say that's important, but it's how I say it that's just as equally as important, I would argue, from a biblical perspective. But then also just from the conservative perspective as well, of just understanding the permanent things is what T.S. Eliot and Edmund Burke were fighting so diligently for. And even not necessarily from a conservative standpoint, but William Wilberforce with the Reformation of Manners that he was fighting so ardently for. But I think right now sometimes, and Emily, I don't know if you can resonate or you agree with this, sometimes I think individuals think that when you talk civil, you're not being authentic, nor are you being strong enough. And like civility has somehow been equated with weakness as well as with fakeness. And do you think do you agree with that? Do you disagree with that?
No, I think that's a misconception people have. But I think of course as Christians we're called to be strong yet kind, and that's what meekness is. It's strength under control. So I think that's a major thing that we need to have, and anyone can see. I think older generations get a lot of things wrong about millennials, but what they get right is that they can see that millennials have a big heart. And so they make these movements, whether you agree with the politics behind them or not. The women's movement, Black Lives Matter, the Me Too movement, they're all backed behind this passion for the less fortunate. And so I think that millennials are wanting to fight for that, and I think that they can do that in ways that don't require anger.
Yeah, we're a cause-oriented generation. I think that's one of the things that's so compelling for what Chelsey does over at First Liberty Institute. They're just championing this religious liberty piece. And Chelsey, that's I think you could probably resonate with that, as well as we can just extrapolate that. it's not simply just First Amendment issues. We can look at countless other issues that millennials are seeing a cause, they're seeing a need, they're seeing a Matthew 25 opportunity, and they're jumping behind it, and they're really being the force that really moves the movement forward, right?
Yes, I mean, I think that's something definitely to be said for millennials and really anyone. Christians, it's hard to, I don't want to just downgrade it to the level of like a cause. It's like truly some of these issues are fundamental to our Christian beliefs and values, especially when it comes to issues like the pro-life issue or being able to preach our own gospel. There are things that are so fundamental to our faith that they're really inseparable from us as an individual, as opposed to like the more political issues or policy questions. So when it comes to that, I think Christians are even more highly motivated, or should be, to like lean in and get involved, and they're volunteering at the local resource centers and things like that.
Yeah, and I really think that that's how you change when you're talking about trying to draw. One, you're trying to distinguish yourself as a Christian before you're a conservative one. I think we can all agree with that. And then the second component, if you're trying to win people over to the conservative movement, I would argue that it's less about trying to own them. It's less about trying to drop the mic on them. But when you're targeting millennials specifically, you're one, wanting to be civil, but two, you're wanting to identify a cause that conservatives can champion. We can champion the cause of the unborn. We can champion the cause. This is going to sound kind of weird, but we can champion the cause of the prisoner, right? With prison reform movement that's happening right now. We can champion these particular causes. And that might be a way that conservatives can begin targeting millennials, is by appealing to them through the causes that they're so passionate about.
Right. Yeah, I agree. I think, and Martin Luther King Jr. is one of my favorite figures ever, because he mobilized people so much, but through so much kindness and love for people. And I think that if we could do that again, that's something that would really resonate with young people.
Yeah, hate is too great a burden to bear. I've chosen to love, right, from King. And so just the idea, and then from a Christian perspective too, that we're to be known by our loved one, that love is the greatest of faith, hope, and love. Love is the greatest of these, et cetera, et cetera. That love is that compelling force, is what Paul says in 2 Corinthians 5:14. But very well. Very good. Well, Emily, it's been so good to have you on.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Thank you so much for doing so well. This has been great, Chelsey. Now it's back to back and forth, and we're going to argue.
No, it's just fun to have millennials, everybody's perspective, because we're different ages of millennial.
Yeah.
I'm at the older end of the spectrum, and you're
I'm right on the border, so I kind of get to see both generations.
Oh, that's great.
It's so great, so great. Well, we got to take a break, but when we come back from the break, we're going to continue talking about this farm bill that was passed. Is this a good thing? Is this a bad thing? And then we'll be exploring specifically. I'm going to pick Chelsey's brain on this abortion issue, specifically how there's going to be over the mail abortion pills that are going to be shipped. We'll be back right after this.
Why should you become a partner with Point of View Radio? Because for decades, this team has made a significant difference in lives and communities across the nation. Because America is dying for lack of biblical wisdom about life and culture. You should give because your gift will make possible cutting-edge information on issues that matter, information you won't hear anywhere else. Why? Because your gift will change lives, because you'll influence our culture with biblical truth, and because you can make a difference for the future. Our nation needs a truth team very badly. Support Point of View Radio today at pointofview.net. Click on Join the Truth Team and choose your level of support. Pointofview.net, or call 800-347-5151. 800-347-5151, or mail that first donation to Point of View, Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221. Box 30, Dallas 75221. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kerby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of View, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. Each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging. Apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now,
Nick Pitts.
And welcome to Point of View. I am your host, Nick Pitts. I'm joined at the Millennial Roundtable by Kerby Anderson and Chelsey Youman of the First Liberty Institute. And this is the third hour that we have been on. So if you've been watching on Facebook right now, thank you so much for that. You can call in and get your participation trophy as well as a sweet parting gift if you can make it through your third hour. But for those of you that are kind of the national audience, we have been on for this is the second hour. Dallas audience is now gone. And so we have been talking about everything from the millennial perspective on church issues during the first hour, to then we talked a little bit about tariffs and President Trump's farm aid bill, and then we jumped into kind of the implications for the 2018 election. Talked a little bit more about the millennial perspective relative to politics and what's happening right now in the Republican Party relative to millennials and the conservative movement. And now we're going to transition and talk about the effects on the 2018 election, because this is what I'm really interested in hearing back from you all, as well as talking with Kerby and Chelsey as well, because we're thinking about right now with the farm aid package that was just passed, that the Trump administration just provided upwards of $12 billion for individuals that are suffering because of the trade war that's happening right now. Specifically, you've got soybean farmers, you've got corn farmers, you've got wheat farmers that have lost an estimated $13 billion, and the president has administered this $12 billion aid package. Will this be one of those things that causes the ripple effects in 2018 that would be detrimental to the Republican Party? Do you think the tariffs, do you think this trade war is going to have a negative impact on Republicans, a positive impact on Democrats during the 2018 election? We would love to hear from you. You can call in at 800-351-1212. Again, that number is 800-351-1212. Or you can leave a comment or question on Facebook, facebook.com/pointofviewradio, and leave a little question or comment right underneath the live video box, and we'll share that online over the air as well. And so, Kerby, when I think about this for a second, I always go back to realizing that the average voter is not paying attention.
That's true.
To what's happening day by day like we are. But this is one of those things, especially for farmers and those that are shopping at grocery stores for bread, or those that are shopping for corn on the cob because we're in the middle of summer season. They're going to see the price impacted on some of these things, and it's going to cause this ripple effect of, do I really want my representative, do I want my elected official there, that I think could have an implication for the 2018 election.
And again, what that sometimes does is cause people who already have preconceived ideas to actually vote according to their convictions in this piece that you've posted. And I would highly recommend people go in. It's the third article that you've posted. The latest survey shows that nearly 3/4 of Republicans, or Republican-leaning independents, don't really have a problem with the tariffs, actually feel that it would benefit the economy. By contrast, 3/4 of the Democrats actually felt just the opposite. You could say the same thing right now about the FISA warrant. Last weekend we had the whole issue with the FISA application. And if you already think that the FBI and the Justice Department are against Donald Trump and you support Donald Trump, then you say this just gives vindication for everything that Devin Nunes says. If, on the other hand, that you're convinced that Donald Trump needs to be impeached and there was collusion, then you say that particular application verifies everything that I've said. So in some respects, it really comes down to
how some individuals who, as you said, are not paying attention. I think we can predict right now that a lot of Republican-leaning individuals probably going to vote for a Republican. A lot of Democratic-leaning individuals going to vote for a Democrat. But it's that middle group that says, I thought the tax cuts were going to help me more, and they're not. And the tariffs seem to have destroyed any kind of financial circumstances I have. Or I'm a farmer, and I'm not making the kind of money that I thought I was going to make. As a matter of fact, I'm losing money. That's going to affect your vote. And so really a lot of that won't be decided, I think, until October or November of this year. That's just a thought.
Right. And I believe this article also basically said the trickle-down effect that we'll see in the economy will be in full swing by that point. Yeah. And so we'll really have a much better idea of how maybe broad these implications are going to be from the tariffs. Now, it does surprise me. This is something that Trump ran on, and it's something I actually saw an interview with him from the 80s where he was saying these exact same things. If anything, this is maybe the most consistent issue he's ever had. He's very principled when it comes to this issue. He's unwavering. And so I think voters knew that they were going to be voting for this, but it's a completely different issue when it starts to impact your consumer choice and your pocketbook. And so we have really yet to see, but I just hope that voters keep the big picture and just don't vote straight economy. I think, what is it? Kerby, do you know what it is? If the economy's bad, they tend to vote economy. If it's good, they vote other issues, right?
And that's the thing. I mean, I've sat around this table for more than 30 years, and we like to wish that people would have an ideology, but the reality is politics is very local, and sometimes you can go and do surveys and find that most Americans think that Congress is not doing a good job, but my congressman's doing pretty good and deserves to be reelected. Yeah. And so they have a re-election rate right now for incumbents that is rivaling the incumbent rate that existed for the Soviet Politburo. I mean, it's just amazing. Oh. But if indeed you get upset with one of your particular congressmen, or the gerrymandered congressional district is one that isn't as favorable as you were hoping that it would be, in the state of Texas, I can talk about Will Hurd or Pete Sessions or some of those that are under some kind of attack, then that has an impact. But otherwise, I think most people tend to stay the course if they like their incumbent. But economic situations, a downturn in the economy, a depression, boy, that affects everybody.
Yeah, it's like a Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? So at the very end of the day, the only way I can have those thoughts of self-actualization, evaluation, is if I can put food on the table. So that's, if Maslow's hierarchy of needs, it's a pyramid at the very bottom. If I can't provide food, I can't think about, well, what do I want to be when I grow up? Because I just got to survive for today. So I need food, I need shelter, I need clothing. Those immediate needs have to be met.
I need China and the tariffs.
But even, so we'll think about Toyota, for example. Okay, so you've got Toyota, which is a car. Well, obviously, the car dealerships and car ownership is going down right now. But something that's very prevalent and even anecdotal within the electoral process is, who do I want to have a beer with? Well, then, if 76% of Americans 76% of adult age Americans are drinking beer right now, the reality is that beer is made with aluminum. Aluminum has a tariff on it. That beer is going up, and you better believe that individuals are going to be able to think about that.
Well, I'll just draw this line in the sand because
talking about beer in the sand. Keep on going.
No beer in the sand. Just a line, and the line is that this is all a discussion for the general. Mm-hmm. This is all a discussion for the general election. When it comes to midterms, know that your vote is going to have much more local effects and congressional impact than it will on trades and tariffs and foreign policy. So that's what voters need to focus on. I think they need to focus on their issues. And this is really, we can all have this discussion, of course, but the general election is where really I think the economy questions come into play.
Well, again, since we're coming to a break, let me just put it real simple, and that is the general election, more people vote. You go to the midterms, fewer, and then all the way down to primaries. And what happens in a primary and the midterms is how enthusiastic your people are. Because I think a lot of these are going to really rise or fall on what's called the ground game. How many people are willing to go out there and knock on doors, and I've done that before, make phone calls, and get people out to the polls? And right now, there seems to be a lot of energy in the Democratic side. We'll see how much energy in the Republican side. Maybe we'll even talk about whether Brett Kavanaugh and that nomination and confirmation makes a difference, too.
And we will talk about Brett Kavanaugh and more of the 2018 midterms when we come back right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
You know, we seem to be witnessing the decline of governmentally sanctioned compelled speech. 3 Supreme Court decisions and the prospect of a new justice on the High Court are the reasons. As we discuss so often on the Point of View radio talk show, compelled speech is perhaps the worst form of anti-free speech. It is bad enough to censor an American citizen from being able to express his or her opinion, but it's even worse to force an American citizen to voice, create, or fund contrary ideas or activities. The Supreme Court ruled against the state of Colorado for punishing Christian baker Jack Phillips. He was fined for refusing to use his artistic talents for a homosexual ceremony, and Justice Kennedy was appalled that the Colorado bureaucrats described the baker's faith as the most despicable pieces of rhetoric that people can use. The court also ruled against the state of California for mandating that a pro-life pregnancy center must advertise for free abortions. In addition to the majority opinion written by Justice Thomas, was a concurring opinion by Justice Kennedy that encouraged the legislators to go back and read the Bill of Rights. In a third case, the justices ruled against an Illinois law that forced state employees to subsidize public employee unions that take political and labor positions contrary to the views of the employees. Justice Alito twice quoted the famous phrase from Thomas Jefferson that to compel a man to furnish contributions of money for the propagation of opinions which he disbelieves and abhors is sinful and tyrannical. The new justice on the court is likely to uphold each one of these precedents and will continue to rule against other examples of compelled speech. That is why it is reasonable to expect to see a decline in these attempts to force people to voice, create, or fund ideas contrary to their deeply held beliefs. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Take Kerby and the Point of View team with you on the go with the Point of View app. Search for Point of View Radio at the Apple or Google Play stores.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
And we are back on Point of View. I'm your host, Nick Pitts. I'm joined at the Millennial Roundtable by Kerby Anderson and Chelsey Youman of the First Liberty.
On during the break,
we just need to leave the microphone on during the break because right now we're strategizing what might be able to say, and so we have been
Supreme Court.
We've been talking about Supreme Court. We've been talking about the 2018 midterm elections. What is the impact of the tariffs? The potentiality for a Supreme Court justice, and wanting to see Brett Kavanaugh. Will that draw voters out to the polls? And so we've been kind of batting that around a little bit, and so we're going to be taking your phone calls as well. You can call in and add to the mix. Specifically, the question that we put before you all is the idea of, relative to the 2018 election, will the tariffs or will the Supreme Court affect voters, the Democrats positively or negatively, Republicans positively or negatively? We would love to hear from you as well. You can call in at 800-351-1212. Again, that number is 800-351-1212, or log on to facebook.com/pointofviewradio. I almost forgot about that Facebook thing, but nevertheless.
Yeah. I think it's going to stay around for a while.
It's going to stick around. It's going to stick around. So let's jump on over to Kathy in California right now. Kathy in California, are you there?
Yes.
Hey, Kathy.
I was wondering. Oh, I'm sorry.
Oh, no, go ahead. What's your point of view?
I was wondering these tariffs on China, because China's taken over some of the South Pacific islands, and there's negotiations still going on with North Korea. Could the tariffs have any impact on how those things might go as far as money-wise in the tariffs that are being placed? Or
Yeah, so President Trump, that's been the one contention with Kathy relative to kind of tariffs. He's really gone after China, and if there is I'll go ahead and say my opinion really quickly and just reveal my partisanship. If there is ever a legitimacy for the tariff, it would be on China, just because their currency manipulation as well as their copyright infringement, intellectual theft. If there's ever a reason to give a significant penalty currently, based on the current information that I've read, but again, I am not a tariff guy. All that to say, President Trump very much has a vested interest, like Chelsey has said, on seeing some of these trade deficits, but also seeing us quit getting the raw end of the deal. Now, I don't think relative to trade deficits, we're getting the raw end of the deal. I just think I view it from the other side of the coin, that foreign entities and companies are wanting to invest in the American experiment. And while we might not necessarily see a direct reciprocity back from that, I would say that they're investing in us in order to be more innovative, as well as to be more uniquely situated to be able to position our economy to be able to thrive. But it will be interesting to see, because China has been in the crosshairs of President Trump when it comes to some of those trade agreements. Well, thank you so much, Kathy, for calling in. I think it's going to be very interesting, because I do think that these tariffs, again, if you continue to push on these tariffs, we're going to see some of these unintended consequences, Kerby. And again, when we see some of these unintended consequences, like these farmers, for example, now granted, farming is much more of a corporate venture now than it is kind of a family backyard kind of thing. So when you think of farming, you need to picture more of some of these big multinational corporations that are running these farmers on these large tracts of land. But I do think they hold a significant level of influence relative to how they could affect the 2018 election, which I think potentially could be harmful for Republicans, but also could be harmful for Democrats, just based upon who's in the office right now.
Well, and again, look at it in terms of foreign policy. Kathy's got a good point, because in China, first of all, it does raise the tension. I mean, when you're sitting across the table with any representative from China, and you have actually put tariffs in place that hurt their ability to sell their goods here, it does increase the tension in the room. That's the first issue. But there are also a couple of other factors in that as well. China can outweigh us, because they recognize that, we could maybe just suffer this for a couple of years. And by that time, either Donald Trump is out of office or his constituency is defeated at the polls. So that's a sense in which that doesn't work as well when we talk about using tariffs to punish a particular country. But like you, I agree that even though I'm not a fan of tariffs at all, and I think we can learn a lesson from the Smoot-Hawley Act in the 1930s, the bottom line is, if there's anybody that deserves to be punished, China's right there at the top of the list, isn't it?
Yeah, China's just been
cyber warfare, another issue that you talk about.
Oh, definitely cyber warfare. Yeah, this just goes back to what I was saying in the first hour, which is tariffs are meant to be, in capitalism, a short-term negotiation tactic, which means the goal is retribution, for lack of a better term, for the deficit on our side. It's to force our way into opening some more markets. And then the second follow-up question that undoubtedly has to be answered is, at what point do you lower the tariffs again? When have you accomplished your goal? And so that's something that really I would like to see some more concrete goals set out for the American people, for us to know what all of this means. But when we talk about, in history in the 30s, the Smoot-Hawley Act, which you referred to, I did pull some statistics from that time. In imports, and worldwide trade actually decreased by 66%. After tariffs were increased. European imports decreased, U.S. exports decreased, unemployment almost doubled, and then there were bank crashes because of lack of investment. So that's a very dire worst case scenario. I don't know that we're looking at that here, but I think that we know that democracy, the values of democracy, are pro-free trade. The values of democracy are saying we're going to open the floodgates, that freedom in all arenas, economic and social, is what's best for everyone. And that, it also really establishes more of like a rule of law, that we're going to respect our agreements and respect other countries, which is why I don't think, as anyone here is saying, that wholesale tariffs are not really a great idea, especially when it comes to our allies, when they're used as a negotiation mechanism with China for specific industries, that's a much more targeted purpose.
And it does make this idea just almost untenable, the idea that we would pull away from the global scene, right? Like I know that there's much talk right now relative to nationalism and globalism, and are you a globalist, are you a nationalist? But I mean, at the end of the day, I mean, we are we're not contingent, but we're not self-sufficient here in the U.S. The reason why you can hear us right now is because of a globalist that was able to build some technology that allowed. So this idea of wanting to, I almost call it, who is it?
Isolationist is really what you're talking about.
Yeah, it's the isolationist pre-World War II. Who was the individual? Why am I blanking on his name right now? Not Kitty Hawk, not the Wright brothers, but the
Lindbergh.
Yeah, there it is. Why are we advocate? Like, there's no way in this globalized world that we can be a pure isolationist. Now, do we need to take care of our vested interests here in the U.S.? Probably, right, Kerby? We should probably we could probably do a little bit more here in the U.S. But to argue that we have to isolate ourselves completely, that just doesn't make any sense. And
there's one consequence we haven't talked about, which is there was a vast increase in corruption and issue-driven or industry-driven, I should say, politics during that time when we had increased tariffs. And so that's my fear we're talking specifically here about the farmers and the bailout. My papa's a farmer, an individual farmer, and I'm very, very pro-farming and agriculture, but he would say he doesn't want to bail out because subsidies really are an issue. And then you're picking and choosing favorites. You're picking and choosing winners and losers. Mm-hmm. There are kickback issues. I mean, it's just a breeding ground for corruption and issues. And I don't think freedom really thrives in that environment. And so in our American experiment, I would really hope that we don't start that now. Where would it stop?
You know, and when Chelsey earlier talked about Adam Smith, what's the title of that book? Of the Wealth of Nations in 1776. And what he argued was that at the time you had what was called mercantilism, in which you had these high trade barriers. And so the idea is to have very high barriers and really concentrate wealth within the country, collect gold, maybe have colonies. And he said, actually, the way to increase wealth is to lower those barriers and actually increase those opportunities entrepreneurially to make a difference. And he said it wasn't really the goal of the baker, the brewer, or anyone else to actually bring about the common good, but by seeking their own self-interest, it's like there was an invisible hand that brought about an end that they did not intend. And so if we really want to increase the economic prosperity, not just in the United States, but around the world, capitalism has brought more people out of poverty than anything else. Now, I know Alexia Ocasio-Cortez is convinced that capitalism is going to end and socialism is the answer. I just want to send her to Venezuela for a while and see whether or not that's working down there, because capitalism is the answer, and capitalism and free trade is the answer, and tariffs is the wrong way to go.
And so we have got to take a break, but when we come back from the break, we'll continue and take some of your phone calls relative to what's happened, what your perception is on the tariff situation. Is it a good thing? Is it a bad thing when you consider the 2018 elections? We would love to hear from you. You can call in at 800-351-1212. Again, that number is 800-351-1212, or jump over to facebook.com/pointofviewradio. And when we come back, we'll continue taking some of your phone calls and questions on the tariff situation, as well as exploring what 2018 looks like right after this.
We live in a digital generation. Point of View is reaching this often overly plugged-in generation with truth. You can keep up with us 24 hours a day using your phone, your tablet, your laptop, or your desktop. Search for the Point of View radio talk show on Facebook, where you can keep up with today's issues, learn about current and upcoming guests by liking us on Facebook. Also, follow us on Twitter. Our handle is @PointOfViewRTS. That stands for Point of View Radio Talk Show. Learn, interact, make a difference with Point of View using new media. And here's one way you can make a big difference. Help us increase our reach by spreading the word among your friends. Share a Facebook post. Tag us in a tweet. With enough joining us to plant seeds, we'll see a tremendous harvest. Come on, it only takes a minute. Search for Point of View Radio Talk Show on Facebook, @Point of View RTS on Twitter, and subscribe to the Point of View Radio Talk Show channel on YouTube. Learn, interact, share. the Point of View radio talk show. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is
Nick Pitts.
And welcome back to Point of View. I'm your host, Nick Pitts. I'm joined at the Millennial Roundtable by Kerby Anderson and Chelsey Youman. And during the break, I was just proclaiming the excellencies of Tennessee and how we've contributed to the union in so many ways. You think about Elvis Presley, Andrew Jackson, Andrew Johnson, Morgan Freeman. I mean, we're doing this thing. But nevertheless, we are hoping that you're going to be able to contribute to the conversation relative to tariffs. And are tariffs going to negatively or positively impact the 2018 midterm elections, and if they impact them for who or against who, rather. Will Republicans win because of what's happening with the tariff situation in 2018? Will Republicans lose? Democrats win? Democrats lose? You can call in at 800-351-1212, 800-351-1212, as well as go on Facebook.com/Point of View Radio. Tariffs, trade war, or will Brett Kavanaugh? Who knows? The Brett Kavanaugh nomination, will that draw individuals to the polls? We're going to be taking your phone calls right now. So we've got Roy in North Carolina right now. Roy, are you there?
Yes, sir, I am.
Hey, Roy, what is your point of view?
Point of view is I want to say God bless you and your entire staff there for the tremendous job that you all do. But I want to speak about the tariffs there. But honestly, I think that it's going to have somewhat of a negative effect on the midterm elections here. But I would give it a 60-40 in favor of the conservative, if that's the way you want to put it, because I'm looking at geographically the Midwest and Texas and slap on to the Gulf, but they're part of the Gulf states too. So slap on into Louisiana and bouncing around Oklahoma and all those that really is the backbone of our farming. Our farming, where the backbone of our farming is done at, as far as commodities-wise, corn and wheat and sorghum and all the rest of this stuff, and soybean. But I think for the most part, I really think that the Democrats and whomever other people are affiliated with, I think they know that we've been at a war with China. But it's just been a different type of war, not your conventional type of war. But we've been at war with China, and everybody realizes that has took a serious look at China because of intellectual theft of properties and so on and so forth. But we've been at not only that, but a technical war. We've been at a war with China. China don't want to have rounds and bombs going down range as far as against the United States. But where I look at it, we got about 5 bona fide communist countries left in this world, and we can just eliminate 2 or 3 of them that would be a bona fide certified threat towards the U.S. as far as economically and politically, and we come up with Russia being one. Perhaps North Korea, but we're dealing with North Korea now, certainly. And China, to me, is the biggest threat out of these 3, and has been and always will be until something is done. And it just so happened that Donald Trump, our president, is placed between a rock and a hard spot. He knows it, and is like, well, if I don't do this, and this is going to happen, but I'm staring at this thing, and this is a bad position to be in, but something has to be done. Now, is there going to be casualties, or is people going to suffer behind the decision? Well, you got to take the lesser of the 2 evils. So I don't totally agree with tariff, because what it can do, but also you got to look on the positive side. It can bring people to the table and have a discussion and come out of there being beneficial to all this included. And I think what Donald Trump is a smart man. I think what he's really doing, along with his cabinet, is trying to figure out what would hurt China the most. What would hurt them the most? Because as far as China, you're looking at a regime there, and you got to find out what commodities, that are, in other words, what makes China tick. And that's the approach strategically is what we have to go after, But as far as me thinking that the Democrats or the liberals would take over would take over the House, the Senate, and Congress, and everywhere else, I still think that the Republicans will come out 60-40 on this,
So Roy, I got a couple of questions. I'm going to yield one of my questions to Kerby, but the first question I've got is, being a man from the Tar Heel state that boasts Tobacco Road, are you a Duke or are you a Tar Heel fan?
car healed all the way.
Okay, well then I'm gonna yield my second question to Kerby when it comes to the tariff situation in your agriculture in your state.
You know, there's a very good article that I might point to, and that appeared in the Charlotte Observer, and it's talking about how the Carolinas, both North Carolina and South Carolina, might be affected. And again, that has to do with some of the things we've just talked about in terms of some of the goods and services, how it could affect some of the assembly plants, how it could affect some of the farmers. But even interestingly enough, something you don't think about in terms of North Carolina, South Carolina, is just, as they pointed out, the price of beer because of aluminum and steel. Now, again, we would imagine most of our listeners, because they're Christians, probably don't drink all those things. But the bottom line is that some of those areas in the country are affected by this. And the struggle that is, I think, facing it is that if you look at those other countries, let's take the European Union, they've already retaliated by having tariffs on Kentucky bourbon, on Harley-Davidson motorcycles. Do you notice where Harley-Davidson was moving the other day? Cigars, that gets back to tobacco that you were talking about. Even peanut butter. So, again, there are going to be some things that are going to be affected. I know you're a smooth peanut butter kind of guy.
Too far, China. Too far.
I know. You're really hitting us hard.
So those are, but again, is it possible that between now and November, the European Union says, enough is enough, and so they back off? That's a possibility. Is China backing off anytime soon? I don't think so.
Yeah. But I think this is I would have went at it, and who knows? Our president is notorious for not giving the enemy, telling the enemy what he's actually going to do, the plans. But I think myself, I think this is temporary. Maybe 90 days, maybe more than that. That these tariffs going to last, and I think he's a strategist anyway, and a lot of folks don't give him credit for that. But he is a strategist, and I'm thinking myself, if it can bring them to the table, and China knows it, and all these other countries knows it too, whether it's the European or not, or Canada or whichever, but they know where they're treating the United States unfair at. They know this, and this war didn't start with Trump, but unfortunately, I think it's going to end with him because he's the type that he's not going to be bullied. And but this war did not start with Donald Trump. It didn't start with I hate to say it, but it didn't start with President Obama either. We've been at war with China, and it's not been a rounds and bullets going down, right? Because I think they are the one that put out that art of war book, and saying that they would actually defeat the United States and their allies without firing a bullet.
Yeah, Mr. Roy, I completely agree with that. I think one of the things that we're continuing to see with President Trump is we can expect the unexpected one, and then what my papaw would say, he's got a lot of irons in the fire right now. We've got the situation in North Korea that just continues to progress day by day. You get the situation that's happening in Turkey right now. Turkey has traditionally been an ally of the U.S. since since after World War II. But what we're seeing is the precarious nature of their economy that's happening right now. You've got to look over to Venezuela, which is on fire right now. You've got Russia that's hacking us, not hacking per se the election we already know about, but what we saw is their electrical grid. They're coming after us even just yesterday, according to the Department of Homeland Security. I mean, we have got a world that is just booming right now, and now we've added to that the fact that we're getting in a trade war right now. There's just a lot that's going on right now. The average voter's not paying attention to most of it, but like has been alluded to, these tariffs have an ability and a capacity to be able to affect just the everyday items, from a can of beer to bread prices to meat prices to cheese prices, which are those tangible things that cause voters to be able to act. And so we've got to take a break, but one of the questions that I want to continue to pose to us and open up the phone lines for is, do you think these tariffs, this trade war that we're in is going to positively or negatively affect the electorate come the midterm elections in 2018? You can call in at 800-351-1212. Again, that number is 800-351-1212. Or you can log on over to Facebook.com/PointOfViewRadio. Again, Facebook.com/PointOfViewRadio. Leave your questions or comments, and what you share online, we'll share over the air as well. And we've got to take a commercial break, but when we come back, more on the trade war in 2018.
Welcome to the First Liberty Briefing. I'm Jeremy Dice. They were sick of a commercialized Christmas. The presence and general distraction from what they believed to be a season meant to remind us of something deeper led Larry Gallo and his family to look for something different. So they left behind the packages and bows to serve the less fortunate in Central America. Larry's girls are physician's assistants, so it was natural for them to take on a medical missions role. Larry, a maintenance engineer, discovered that the kids in line needed some company. So as his daughters provided the medicine, Larry kept the kids happy. So what's the problem? Well, Larry Gallo is better known as Sergeant Larry Gallo. When the U.S. Air Force featured Gallo's story in one of their publications, an atheist group said the article violated the First Amendment. They even alleged that Gallo's story, quote, emboldens our Islamic enemies because we look like crusaders and it enrages our Islamic allies, unquote. They wanted the article taken down. After a quick internet search recently, I discovered that the article in question is still active on an Air Force website, and it should be. The Air Force should never cave to demands of censoring religion from public view. It should never punish those service members who put service over self, even outside the line of duty. To learn how First Liberty is protecting religious liberty for all Americans, visit firstliberty.org.
Could you lose your career because of your faith? Could your pastor be sued because of his sermons? Can students and teachers be punished because of what they believe about God or what they say? Can the government or even your employer force you to violate your beliefs? Get the answers, and if necessary, legal protection from First Liberty Institutes at firstliberty.org. That's firstliberty.org. If you want hope for religious freedom, go to firstliberty.org.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
And welcome back to Point of View. I'm your host, Nick Pitts. I'm joined at the Millennial Roundtable by Chelsey, Youman, and Kerby Anderson, and we have been talking about the implications of the trade war on the 2018 election. And I'm going to go ahead and say it. Maybe we'll stir up some discourse here. Maybe we won't. I'll just go ahead and Chelsey, let's just argue. You just tell me what you're going to argue for or against.
Let's picking fights over there.
Yeah, well, let's just pick fights. I'm going to just go ahead and be blunt and honest about this. I just don't think it looks good for Republicans at the end of the day. I know that you're the optimist, but I think when you and again, I know that I just saw break over Twitter during the break that there were some concessions in the EU relative to soybeans and et cetera. So I think there was some good that happened there. I didn't get a chance to read it. I just literally dropped a little bit of good news, but you didn't really get the complete news. And so, but nevertheless, I just don't think it's going to look good for us because at the end of the day, what's going to happen is I'm going to have to pay more money, and that tax benefit that I got is now dried up because I had to pay more money for food, and I just don't think it's going to look good.
At the end of the day, it's about numbers and not how you feel, Nick. And
facts do care about my feelings,
and,
though.
you know, the House is a far cry from leaning left.
Yeah.
It is. It's going to be too much of a stretch. I think they need 24 seats. There just aren't that many up for grabs that are, I think.
Ooh, so you're going to go that far, huh? So you're going to think the House is going to stay Republican.
I think we're keeping both. And then I think that you need 2 seats. We can't lose, I should say. Republicans cannot lose 2 seats.
Okay.
And Democrats have 9, I think, up or more
yeah.
for re-election.
9 or 10, yeah.
And we've got 2.
Yeah.
And that are maybe going to go either way. I mean, so really it's going to be a close call, but I don't think we're losing majorities. I think that people are going to be happy in general with the economy. And I think conservatives need to remember about the issues that are near and dear to your heart, the pro-life issues, the pro-free speech issues, pro-religious liberty issues, across the board. Pro-Israel is a great example. Across the board, when it comes to conservative issues, Trump has kept his promises, or at least kept people, not even to mention the courts. The list is so long, I can't remember everything. He's putting people in the right places. He's doing good work, and the right policies are getting adopted. And if people are really looking and doing their research and due diligence, you'll see that. And I think having more Republicans keeping our majority in the House will continue to enable those types of policies to be implemented.
So one of the things, Kerby, I was thinking about the other day is the 1960 presidential election. John F. Kennedy obviously spent a little bit of time with that. And one of the things that I think worked in Kennedy's favor is that when he wanted to reach out to Catholic audiences, specifically his people, what he did is he took that 1960 that infamous, the famous meeting in Houston
with the Baptists,
with the Baptist ministers, and he put them he put the nasty, quote, to use the internal campaign language, he used those with the nastiest faces, and he put those on the front because he knew that those nasty faces, when Catholics saw that, it would compel them even the more so to get out and vote. And I think in the 2018 election, what we're going to see is we're going to see is President Trump's not going to be on the ballot, but I think we're going to continue to see from the Democrats a certain nastiness, maybe some of the comments that he said, some of the language that's been used, which I think we can all agree is it's just not good, because we haven't even mentioned so far today, it's been 3 hours, and we haven't even mentioned the fact that that the tapes were released between Michael Cohen and President Trump yesterday, and we're continuing. I don't want to see porn stars anymore on the that are paraded before us. But
do you think there's really going to be a correlation between that and local midterm elections with names and faces that you recognize are from your state?
But I think that there's going to be, though, because I don't want to say that. That might be going too far, and I don't want to go that far. I do think that there's going to be such an enthusiasm that's going to be in the Democrats' favor when it comes to the House. Yeah. I don't think it's going to fall. I'm of the mind that the Senate is going to stay in the Republican column. I think the House is going to switch back over to the Democratic column. I just think that there's so much movement right now. And so, yes, there's a doubling up relative to Republican support of President Trump. But I think Democrats have always proven the case that they've been able to get out early vote, and they've been able to get out to the polls in significant numbers. And I think there's so much energy and momentum on their side relative to this. I just don't see how Democrats don't take over the House in 2018. Response? Please just argue with me. You don't even have to believe what you say.
I don't know that that's true. I don't know that it's a midterm. I think voter turnout is low. I think I'm going to go register voters after this because
just to prove me wrong.
You certainly do.
Just to prove you wrong.
Let me put one more thing on the table, which we haven't talked about at all this day, and that is #walkaway. Anybody been following that?
Yes, that's my favorite new hashtag.
I didn't see this hashtag.
#walkaway is all about the Democrats that are leaving the Democratic Party. We talked about this yesterday, that you have the third way, which is, again, the old Bill Clinton moderate Democrats who actually went to Ohio the other day, which is one of the places where we are broadcasting in, and saying we have got to pull this party back to the center because they're starting to see that everybody is following Bernie Sanders and Alexia Ocasio-Cortez, two socialists. You have most of the Democratic candidates for the presidency. I know they're already thinking about this. That are all not only saying abolish ICE and not only saying that we want a single-payer plan and all these other, I mean, you can go down the 5 issues that we've talked about on this program so often, so that you're seeing the #walkaway. So you're right. On the one hand, the Democrats will take advantage of the angry faces, as you used, on the Republican side, but it's possible, we'll see, whether the Republicans will take advantage of the angry faces on the other side. All the horrible things that have been said about Donald Trump, about various campaigns. And you just were in Tennessee. That governor's race has gotten so ugly that I think that's just a preview of coming attractions.
Oh, my goodness. And I know some of our Tennessee listeners right now know exactly what I'm talking about. I sat in a place and I was just trying to watch a little bit of baseball because the Cubs and the St. Louis Cardinals were playing over the weekend. And I bet I saw in one commercial break at least 2 or 3 governor, and there's only like 6 commercial spots. So 2 or 3 governors, because you have Bill Lee, you have Diane Black, you've got you've got just these individuals that it's just the animosity that's just
mudslinging like you've not seen in a long time.
If y'all want to see some dirty,
it's 2016.
it is getting, but it's not just in 2016. At least it was just live, but here it's like premeditated with some of these commercial ads. And so it's just very fascinating what's happening right now in Tennessee. And it will be very interesting to see as we continue to move forward the impact these tariffs are having and the trade war is going to have on the electorate, one. And then two, who's going to come out on top in both the House and as well as the Senate, as well as in the collected governor races that are happening across the U.S. as well. But without further ado, we've got to end the show today. And so instead of walking away, perhaps you might be able to walk towards, if you haven't registered yet, a registration booth, or walk towards your neighbor and to be able to interact with them in a way that might be able to build a stronger union. But nevertheless, Chelsey, thank you so much for being here.
It's been fun.
Has it really?
Yeah, I really have.
Has it? Okay,
got to talk about nerdy issues all day. It was great.
So good, so good. And Kerby, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you so much for giving up the seat. You always are just so gracious, and so we're so thankful for that. What's on tomorrow's show for us?
Well, I was thinking two things. First of all, it's Andrew's birthday today, right?
Andrew,
and it's your birthday. Yours is next Tuesday, right?
Okay, I need time for my solo.
Okay.
Hold on. I can't find it. I can't find the picture.
But your birthday next week, right? See, I remember that too. So two July birthdays here. Isn't that something?
July is a strong month to say the very least. And so, well, thank you all so much for joining us. A couple of things I want to commend to you. Go on Facebook.com/PointOfViewRadio and be sure to like the Facebook page.
And send you a birthday greeting.
And send me a birthday greeting. Send me a birthday greeting.
Or some peeps.
Peeps. Yeah, I always take some peeps. And then also the opportunity as well, you can go on to pointofview.net. And when you go to pointofview.net, you'll see the daily briefing there as well. That is a little email that I write every morning. That's an overview of the day's news and gives a biblical perspective. You can sign up for that at thebriefing.net. Again, www.thebriefing.net, or go to pointofview.net and find that link there as well. And so we're done for the day, and so we will see you back here tomorrow.
Why does Kerby Anderson do what he does? Because he believes in God's ability to use you to make a difference.
There's a real need for us to articulate a responsible biblical perspective and to give people an understanding of what is happening in the world, and in addition to educating them, to then empower them to go out and make a difference for Christ.
Together we can push back the growing darkness. It's not going to be easy. But by God's grace, it is happening one person, one community at a time. Join us in this mission. Become a monthly partner. $1 a day, $30 a month will make a huge difference. Or perhaps you can do $100 a month. We need partners of all sizes. We need you. Give today online at pointofview.net. At the top of the page, next to the Donate Now button, click on Become a Monthly Partner. Pointofview.net. Mail your donation to Point of View, Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221, or call 800-347-5151. Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.